Hi, and welcome to the Luminaries In and Out of Sect podcast, a show about the moon and how astrologers embody and relate to it. My name is SP Hall, and I'm your host. In today's episode on the Scorpio Moon as the Sect Light, I speak with two of my friends, Christa Lei and McKenzie Raye McCormick. As we wrap up this moon series this month, I'll be releasing a sun sign series, the first episode of which will drop towards the beginning of the second week in November. I'm really excited to be moving into this new chapter of the podcast as we reach the first anniversary of its creation. I hope you enjoy that new series. As always, if you enjoy the work that I'm doing, please contribute to the podcast's sustainability by becoming a supporting member or offering a one-time donation on my website. There you can also find information on my services. I'm offering natal and timing consultations, as well as answering corollary questions. Hope you enjoy the conversation.
Yeah, I have Mayo with me. He's great. We can talk about our Mars connection when we talk about our moons, because I'm like, that's just a huge thing.
It is.
Speaking of that, I have my dog next to me too, and he might need to go out at some point in this conversation, so I might need to pause to do that. Just FYI.
Cool. Congrats on did you officially
Yeah, we officially adopted him. Yeah,
let's go.
With the moon in Scorpio, they were like, you have 24 hours to sign this contract, and I was like, all right.
Bet.
Yeah. It's a sign. It's a sign.
It absolutely is. Yeah, moon and Mars happening in the 12th. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Also, my mom's a Gemini rising, so it's her 6th.
Oh, it was your mom who fell in love with your foster dog?
I mean, we both did. But yeah, she's like, I'm not giving him up.
I love that. I love that your mom's a Gemini rising. My dad's a Gemini rising.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
That's funny. Does he have any Gemini or Sag placements?
No, he's a super Virgo Libra.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm still trying to figure out my dad's rising. I'm still on the same two signs potentially. But he's like a Libra Scorpio.
We're living the same life right now because I'm rectifying my mom's chart and I'm between two rising signs right now.
What are you between?
Aquarius and Aries.
Oh, okay.
Ooh.
Yeah. Because the only time we have is any piece of data is a photo of her dad holding her, and it says Janet at 28 hours old.
Ooh.
Massive WTF. So we're looking at the lighting in the photo, what the dad is wearing. We're in deep research mode, and I've completely ruled out Pisces because my mom is not ruled by a benefic. End of story. There's just no way around it. She is ruled by a malefic 1,000,000%. But I'm just between the two because she has 2 planets in Aquarius, but she doesn't have anything in Aries. But she has some very Martian qualities that I can't deny. So we're in deep rectification on it.
Rectification is so fun. I'm trying to do that for my dad as well, but with my mom, I just asked her birth time, and it was so funny because my mom, she was like, oh, I was born at this time, and she's like, that's why my name is my name. My mom's name is Chona, and I was like, what do you mean Chona? And she's like, because I was born at Alas Ochos Na, so it's like Ochona. And I was like, okay, shit. So your fucking name is part of your birth. Okay,
it's your birth time.
Yeah.
Damn.
And so I'm like that's crazy. And then she's a Cancer rising, ruled by a Libra moon.
Wow.
She's a Scorpio sun. I'm a Scorpio. I'm a Libra sun, Scorpio moon. It's fucking crazy.
Wow.
It's a very deep relationship with my mother, and we both have it's in the chart. It's fucking crazy.
Wow, I have a similar thing. I had a feeling this would be brought up because the moon, the mother, fallen moons. There's going to be a mom thing there.
Yeah, I always say you got a mom or a daddy issue. Yeah, let's look at your moon and where it's placed.
Literally, I feel that. Yeah, because obviously having moon in Scorpio, my mom's is in Taurus though.
Ooh,
cool.
And we both also have planets in Scorpio. And so we have like the complete overlap in so many ways, because she has like, I have Mercury, Mars, but for her it's Venus in Scorpio. So we have this like super intimate, like dignity, debility situation on that axis that has like pulled the relationship to a place of consistent, fixed intensity throughout our entire life. It's just so like the delineation is so on the nose. It's like, oh, what's the relationship with your mom like? Intense. How long has it been intense? Forever.
In my entire lifetime.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because my mom's a Gemini rising, also a Sag moon, also a Jupiterian Mars. So we have square Mars. She has Mars in Pisces. I have Mars in Sag. So it's like, yeah, it's really, really
children of
interesting.
Jup.
Yeah. And so I think my dad is either a Pisces rising or an Aquarius rising. He has Mercury in Sag, Jupiter in Gemini, like for sure. I'm just like, I'm not sure if Jupiter's in the 4th or the 5th, because I feel like it could go either way. But he is like a very fixed person. So I think he's an Aquarius rising rather than a Pisces rising. He's the kind of person who's just like, yeah, I said I'm going to do this for the next 30 years. So I'm just going to do that.
Yeah.
Like, all right, Dad.
I'm just going to commit to that for the rest of my eternal livelihood, literally.
Basically, which feels very like Aquarius rising, Saturn and Scorpio. All right. Can y'all give me a brief introduction to yourself and your astrological practice? McKenzie, do you want to go first?
Oh, sure. Hi, I'm McKenzie Raye McCormick. My practice, I would say, is rooted in like ancient Hellenistic astrology. I took Chris Brennan's Hellenistic astrology course. Also took his electional course. I would say I use modern planets. I don't use modern rulerships though. Living in a modern time, it's hard to not be also something of a modern astrologer because of the world that you have been conditioned and socialized in. But my practice is very much rooted in like relational agency, I would say, which is a term that one of my friends recently gifted me, and I'm grateful for that. But it's essentially about like how much power you have to connect with everything around you, and the degree to which you feel confident and comfortable doing so within your means, within what you can, literally within as much as you can emotionally handle, and essentially figuring out how that body bucket that you have and how much energy you have can be displaced and spread around you. Pretty much all my work is surrounded in embodiment in some way, because before I was a practicing astrologer, I've been a dancer and a dance teacher. And so everything that I know about astrology is thus rooted in understanding of my body and of the body as a whole. And so a lot of my work comes through that. I would say, like, along with Chris Brennan, I've done Drew Levante's electional course, and Drew's like good friend, and I would definitely say a teacher as well. I also have, I cannot call myself a medical astrologer because I do not feel confident enough as any type of medical professional to do that. Although I have had wonderful colleagues and friends tell me that I should probably be confident enough to say that, because I've done a couple medical astrology like courses and have done so much and talked with Kira Sutherland a lot, Cameron Allen, and with the body being such a focus in my work, it's something that I should likely talk about more, but in a very 12th, 6th house way. A lot of the things that I'm good at, I don't necessarily talk about openly. You just kind of have to figure it out. But yeah, I would say that's a lot of who I am. Being like a dance teacher for over 10 years, I've taught kids, I've taught adults, and I've recently started performing more. And then the other also very 12th, 6th part of my life is that I work with my family business, and we make over-the-counter holistic healthcare products. And so a lot of my time is literally spent mixing oils, making products, scooping shea butter, in a very raw way, working with things and materials that help people's lives and improve their bodily health. And so, yeah, the body is everything that I do and everything the way that we relate to it. And that's primarily where my practice is centered.
I feel like I would call you like a relational embodiment astrologer. Like you're an embodiment astrologer, an embodied astrologer.
I've been kind of working with that term a little bit, and so I'm glad to hear that from someone. Thank you.
From an external source to reflect that back onto you, and it's like it feels right or it doesn't feel right. Yeah, I get.
And you
that.
also you also have a podcast, which, if I may, I think is similarly in line with this podcast about like lunar embodiment. You have a podcast about being a body, and you're doing a Mars embodiment series right now. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your wonderful podcast?
My podcast is called Funk with Fate. Christa has been on my podcast. We had a threesome with John. We did an episode on tattoos and astrology, which was absolutely epic.
So tattooed.
Look at us.
Look at us.
Truly covered in them. And so, as you have a series that you're doing, your podcast on the moon, I call it the spicy rendezvous because Mars is my baby. And it's essentially the same format, like talking with astrologers who have Mars in that sign, and we're moving through the Mars cycle. So right now Mars is in Scorpio right this moment, and I haven't yet recorded it, but we are hoping to record in the next 2 days, the Mars and Scorpio episode. But yeah, like that is literally like the premise of the show. If you ever listen to it, it's like in the intro, like this is a show about being a body and all of the good things, all of the bad things, all of the ouchy things, all of the beautiful things of that. And in that way, that is definitely a piece of like my fallen moon coming to light, and like, let's talk about all of the body things and everything that can relate to it. Cause it's not just a podcast about astrology, although that is very much the basis of it. It's literally called Funk with Fate. And we are fated to be bodies, whether we like it or not. So yeah.
I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be a flesh
I
vessel.
did not ask to be a body, truly.
I did not ask to be a flesh vessel.
Christa, would you like to give us a little introduction as well?
Sure. So I'm Christa Lei. I'm also like a Hellenistically trained astrologer. I've done some medieval stuff. I primarily work with natal astrology just because I feel like I feel like a lot of my clients and a lot of my like audience is very local to New York. So I live on Lenape land. I live in New York, and I have a pretty robust practice here. I work out of a tattoo studio and online, but working out of a tattoo studio called Long Time Tattoo, and it's an AAPI queer owned run collective of tattoo artists, and also me being the resident witch astrologer death doula there. So a lot of my practice is really like, it is relational. I'm borrowing that term from like Palace Augustine and Diana Rose Harper, of like, I really focus on relationships, on like relationships to like the self. I have this thing of like, I try to guide people into better relationships with themselves, others, nature, gods, and guides, because that is what I am interested in. And I think astrology has been a really great tool for allowing those connections to open up. And so I'm a little different in that I mainly focus on creative ways to make sure that is some. So it's like, I also style. I started that recently because everyone was like, you need to start doing that more because you have a really specific aesthetic that people want to see, and like also helping people to like be more at home in their body, and like accept this flesh vessel that we were born in.
A Libra god.
And also like I do death doula work, and the astrology stuff I think is, like I've done some electional, I've taken Chris Brennan's course, obviously, the Bible, Hellenistic astrology, the study of fate and fortune, available fine bookstores everywhere.
Everywhere.
Part of my laptop book stack right now.
I know, the Bible, as I like to call it, and Demetra George's stuff. I would say that I have like a burgeoning fixed star practice that I've been a little bit not as like active on, and it's been a little difficult for me to like practice more of that just because I have been so busy getting married and doing some other stuff. Living life, like, but I studied, I've studied with Sam Reynolds, I've studied Chris Brennan, Austin Coppock is a big influence on me. And I would say like I've been mentored by a lot of modern astrologers and taking classes. So my entry into astrology was through like modern astrology, but I don't really use modern rulerships. The only time I really use mundane like astrology, like modern planets and looking at modern planets, is when I focus on mundane astrology, which is not that often because I just don't like, the world is going through enough as it is. I don't want to have to astrologize and explain that through events and stuff. But yeah, no, it's been fun. So I've learned from Annabelle Gatt, who is a local astrologer. She writes for Vice. Colin Vidal is a good friend of mine. And so
we love Colin.
I love Colin.
We love Colin.
Amelia Quint, who like is more of a writer, but she also has taught, she really was the one who like moved me into actually practicing. Both actually all three of them, Colin, Amelia, and Annabelle, were really the first three to be like, you have the chart for this, you should do it professionally. And they really like sent me off into the world. I'm really influenced by Jason Hawley. Love Jason Hawley.
I love Jason Hawley. He's truly one of my favorite astrologers alive right now. And I can say that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, when I went to Santa Fe, like I ended up messaging and reaching out to him, and we had coffee, and it was just like the sweetest thing. It was just like, oh my God, like we have very similar charts and placements. So it was just very much like coming home. So I love learning from him. And then my main mentor right now is Amaya Rourke, who used to focus on fixed stars a lot, and is, you know, an Algolian, and also has basically been like, you're an Algolian too. And I'm like, it's so hard being an Algolian. So I really love the fixed stars in that, like in the firmament, they are the like highest sphere, you know? So I focus a lot on that privately. And then also a lot of like, I have a pretty simple but robust magical practice. And so I focus a lot on that, but you know, as kind of like we've all said, like we kind of have things. I've heard from people call me like a hoarder in terms of my skills, because I really only feel confident in like being a relational astrologer. I do like a synastry readings and stuff, and I also do this really cool collaboration with my I call her my work wife, but she said I can't call her that anymore. I have to call her my real wife now. My wife Celeste and I, we have this collaboration called Cosmic Catharsis, where like I give we choose applications, and then I give the person a birth chart reading, and then from there I give Celeste a narrative prompt, and like an image that I see through basically like the transits happening now with this person and also their chart, and we come up with this really cool collaborative, like, I have this narrative, she makes it into a tattoo. And that's been going on for like a year, and it's been one of my favorite things to do. But the practice, it's been a good time. And so I'd like to think of creative, accessible ways for people to have self-exploration with themselves and others and whatever, through the chart and through astrology. Because first and foremost, I think like a lot of the reason why like we all kind of get along is like astrology is also the body. It is nature. It is everything around us. And so like this relational approach to astrology of like, you have to be able to see that you're in relation to things, everything all at once, is an important thing to learn. But it's like the process of learning that, and like the process of accessing that probably through your chart, will be mostly in like looking at the specifics and being like, you don't have to relate to this aspect of like your life, because I'm like, you don't naturally, like in your chart, it's not a way that you relate to that. So let's find a way for you to healthily do that and empower you through your chart, so that you're able to like cope through this situation or this transit, the way that you should, or the way that you would be easiest for you.
Yes. What you said reminded me of something actually. So I did a couple of Jason Hawley's workshops at like ESAR and NORWAC this year. And during his workshop at NORWAC this year, we had taken a break. And so like went to like lunch, went to the bathroom, came back or whatever. And Nicholas Polomonakos was in the lobby, just like hanging out. And I walked by and he was like, as one does at NORWAC, you hang out in the lobby. And I walked by and he was like, oh, what are you doing right now? And I was like, oh, I'm in Jason Hawley's workshop. And I'll never forget, he looked at me because he was like, oh, are you liking it? And I was like, I love it. And he's like, that makes perfect sense for you. Absolutely perfect sense for you. And he was like, are y'all like moving around in there? I was like, fuck yeah, we're moving around in there. What do you think we're doing? And I remember him just like the look on his face being like, of course you would be into that. That makes perfect sense. And a similar thing happened when I had a conversation with Gabe about it. And he was like, of course you love Jason. Because one of my favorite sessions that I offer is literally like an astro dance, like embodiment, where it's like chart driven with like music and movement and like guided prompts that like lead you along like this journey through your chart and coming into your body and like awareness of the things together. And so the funny moment of people just being like, of course that's your thing, like that just makes perfect sense. And what you said reminded me of that, and so thank you for that.
I think it's so funny. We also like all met at NORWAC 20.
Yeah,
true.
I was going to give a shout out to NORWAC and just conferences in general. I know that it's like a privileged thing to be able to attend a conference. It's not the cheapest thing, but if you can do it, it can really bring you in contact with a lot of different people, and you can have these organic experiences of people like, you know, trying to you know, like make fun of you in the lobby or whatever for how you operate. No shade to Nick or Gabe or anybody, but yeah,
I mean, they're spitting facts.
Yeah,
spitting absolute facts.
Totally. Yeah, I met both of you at NORWAC 2022. McKenzie, I think we met like quite briefly, and we've gotten to know each other pretty well through Ascended Assemblies since then. And Christa, we went on this voyage to like try and get food with a group of people.
Yeah.
I'm interested. Yeah, I'm interested to hear what you were doing in the mall, because I've had a few people on the podcast who were like, told me how, like, based on their moon sign, what they like branched off to do. Like Erin Tack Shipley and I like went into the Container Store and had a super emotionally intense conversation and like got to know each other a lot better. We're both Sag moons. And Steph Koifman was telling me that she like got a massage. She's a Taurus moon, and she was like, I'm gonna go get a massage before I eat.
I think I got a massage with all of them.
You got a massage with them too?
I got a massage, yeah. I think because I'm like, I don't really remember what I was doing. And then I'm like, no. When there's an opportunity for me to get like a decently priced massage and they have openings, I'm gonna get a massage.
You're there.
Yeah, I'm like, that's
I feel that.
That's the Libra sun, and like and also I think like at that moment, and also NORWAC, if people listening to this haven't been, it's like there is literally like everyone, that's a huge conference, there's a huge mall, everyone's eating at the same places unless you have a car, right? And it also
seems like it's the only place for people to go that live around there. Like go to the mall and eat at the food court. Not like,
because it is a massive food court. It really is.
Yeah. I think we were like waiting for like, I want to say that no, a bunch of other people were waiting for the Cheesecake Factory, and it was just like all the restaurants there, you have to reserve in advance, or you just have to like have someone go and show up. But yeah, we wandered around that mall for like, I think y'all ended up just ordering food.
I don't even remember.
I don't even remember what we did. I think we ended up like, I don't even know. I don't remember. It was just like, that was really like a moon thing where I'm like, I'm fucking hungry and I have to wait
everybody
2 hours for like this fucking thing. I might as well just get food and go. But yeah, NORWAC is really, I think I really love the experience and learning, but it is one of those things where like I'm an introvert and I need time to like relax. And it's also funny because it's like, I don't know how this experience was for you all, but I mean, like, especially because when I met you, SP, like when we met, you were not like an astrologer at the time.
No, I wasn't.
Starting to get into it.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting to see your perspective as like someone who was watching all these people like bring out everyone's fucking decked out in talismans, like everyone's decked out with their materia, like and all these protective things to like, you know, the energy is really big. And so I was like, yeah, I need to like protect myself at this point. And it's also like there was another COVID spike, I think, at that time. Yeah. So all of us were like masked and also like wearing our fucking Asclepius stuff or like a Jupiter health talismans, you know, like I can imagine that can be really overwhelming. And I think just the energy can be really overwhelming for someone who is not used to it. Yeah. So it's like, it's also like, even if you stay at the hotel, so there it's at a hotel. Even if you stay at the hotel, it's like the energy is very magically operant and strong. So it's just kind of like you have to protect yourselves and you have to like you have to take a lot of breaks.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for me in that environment, I was very much like observing I kind of like step back, and like I don't have a 12th house moon like you do, but like I was definitely like step back, like observe, watch people. I would like talk to people as well to get to know them. But I think like a lot of I kind of stuck to the same people, and like I met both of you there. But I think it was definitely like it was a lot, and also like none of us slept. No one slept. No one sleeps there. It's a good exercise in taking care of your body.
Yeah.
Right? Like you have to watch yourself, because I did not sleep. Also, it's conferences, so everyone drinks. There's a huge bar. If you haven't been to Norwalk, there's also a huge bar like right in the middle of the lobby. So like everyone's drinking.
It was very interesting for me, like the difference between last year and then this year, because last year I was drinking, but this year when I went to Norwalk, I was alcohol free. And so I had gotten there like, as I do like generally every year on Norwalk, I try to get there a day or two early so that I can like go climbing, like hang out with friends that I have there. And so I usually do rent a car. But because I didn't drink this year, I was like the DD to like take people to their Airbnbs and like go like take them like restaurant or whatever, stuff like that. Like take someone back to another, like the hotel that they were staying at, like a couple miles away. And so it was interesting kind of feeling that like almost intermediary situation where I almost like felt kind of like I was floating, because I had these moments where I was like, I have to go up in my room and just sit here by myself for 15 minutes and just breathe, because it does get very overwhelming, even when it's people you want to spend time with, people you hypothetically haven't seen like since last year at Norwalk, or like even longer, people that you've been wanting to meet, that you've just been talking to online, like all of these connections that you're making, you want to be there and present. But then, yeah, it's like very much for me, it was like, I have to protect myself and have time to like be a body. There was even this year, like I completely skipped out on one of the lectures and I went and like worked out in the hotel gym with Hawk and Tony, because I was like, I gotta fucking go. Like I gotta, not listening to this, not doing this, I gotta go be a body for a while.
I loved being at Norwalk in 2022, but I gotta say, when you were telling me about that workout, I was like, fuck, I wish I was at Norwalk in that gym working out. Because when I went, I think like everyone was at the gym, or everyone was at the bar, and I was like at the gym alone, like working out, and I was like having a great time.
It's so fun. Honestly, there is something there. I really have a feeling that like hotel gyms are like portals. Like every time that I've ever been inside of like a hotel gym, the energy in there is weird, wild.
So
like
weird.
It's so good though. Like it's so fun. It's just like, man, I'm being a body in a place that other bodies are bodies, but none of our bodies really know each other. We're just like ephemerally bodying in the same space. Yeah, it was a really good workout too. I needed it bad.
Mm-hmm.
I do love when like your parents or like people in your life end up being like a significant placement for you, especially 12th house placements. It's like, oh, this person fucking falls into my 12th house. No wonder why everything just fucking unravels. Like everything just unravels the way it should. It's my undoing. It's like hanging out with this person is my undoing, but I love it. I still love it.
Absolutely.
But also that's a very Scorpio moon thing too. It's like, I love those things. I will keep that. I was like, I love this thing so fiercely. I have, you know, my night chart. I mean, like going into our moon placements, right? And like, I'm a night chart baby, right? I mean, we both, yeah, night chart babies. Like my benefic sect is like also in the same sign. I can't believe I'm exposing my chart like this.
I knew that would happen. Funny enough, whenever we were talking about doing this episode, I was like, yes, the exposure.
Mm-hmm. I really don't like to share like my entire chart with people, at least unless I'm doing a trade, or like unless we like have a significant reason to, just because I'm like, I will never put out my entire chart. I did that one time and then you made a meme out of it, and then I was like, I'm removing this immediately after.
Within 24 hours.
Within 24 hours it's gone. Because like I don't want to expose myself like that, but I do like say my placements anyway. All that is to say is like my moon and my Mars are in mutual reception, and then I'm just a watery little bitch, and my Venus is also in the same sign as my moon, so it's like I feel like for the Scorpio the Scorpio moon, it's very much like, do not perceive me, but like, do not perceive me. And it's also like, I also have a really hard time like getting into my emotions and like accessing them. And especially with the Mars and the moon and the mutual reception, it's like, oh, it's so funny because like I couldn't cry for a really long time, and now I realize like I only cry when I'm angry and frustrated, which you know, Cancer, the Mars moon mutual reception. And then also like I would also, as a kid, to cry, I would, because I held into my emotions, like I would have to be like physically hit or something, like when I was and that's, I mean, that in a way it was more of like, you know, like I would be playing at recess and then like a ball would hit me and then I would cry because it's like, it doesn't even hurt, but it's like I'm just crying because like all of my emotions are now released. And it's like embarrassing to also like be hit in the face with a ball in front of people, but it was definitely like, oh, it doesn't even hurt. It's just like the physical act of like having that like kind of like the emotion smacked out of you in that instance is like, oh, jarring.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you feel that too, McKenzie.
If I may
go
really
ahead.
quickly, it's interesting because you both kind of have like this mutual reception between Mars and the moon. McKenzie, you have Mars in Taurus, moon in Scorpio. So there's like a kind of exchange there as well.
For
And
sure.
then Chris, as you just said, you have Mars in Cancer and the moon in Scorpio. So there's this kind of domicile exchange there as well, but like from the places of their fall. And so, yeah, I'm just curious to hear for both of you how you feel like that kind of plays out.
I cry all the time, honestly. Like I feel that a lot. Like I've honestly never had any issue crying. There's never been any like thing that has stopped me, because except for perhaps my own guilt and shame over letting myself be so raw in front of people, because although I've never felt weird about it, others have constantly made me feel weird about it. Their perception of how people handle their emotions has been projected onto me that have made me internalize this feeling of, oh, I shouldn't cry in front of people because that's not what you do. But I cry when I'm sad, when I'm frustrated, when I'm happy. I am literally waterworks. And the moon is my only water placement. You know, that's the only planet that I have in a water sign at all. And I've gone through periods of time of like not drinking enough water. But at this point, I'm one of the most well-hydrated people that there are, because I have to. And that's part of the relationship with Mars, is like, I have to feed my moon and my moon has to feed my Mars. Like there is this undeniable energy within them that constantly has to be doing something and be fed to feel sustained.
And what does that feeding look like to you? Like, are there different ways that happens other than like the obvious, like food consumption?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I feed it with movement. I feed them with movement. So I guess if anyone doesn't know, I'm a multi-sport athlete. I'm a dancer, I'm a rock climber, I'm a weightlifter, I'm a runner. I'm constantly feeling some sort of ache and pain somewhere. If it's not physical, then it's emotional or mental or spiritual. And that's kind of the fallen moon experience, I feel like, is being well versed in different types of pain. And so for me, that like, it's both a push and a pull of like, I have to feed my body with movement to feel like I can continue functioning as a human body, period. But then also I feed it to the extent that it's now depleted, because I've either fed too much or worked too hard or run myself so ragged that there's nothing left. And I'm like literally scraping at like the bottom of the barrel at times.
I feel like that's very, I relate to that in so many ways. And I also feel like it is not, I mean, sorry, that it's a common experience for martial moons. Like, it's just like the experience of Mars and the moon being entwined, especially for both of us, right? Like, I have this mutual reception, you have this like fun opposition situation. So it is like this reception of some sort where it's like, I would say I like cried a lot when I was younger, when I was like a kid, and then I just stopped at some point. So it's like, I think that's that socialization as well of like, you shouldn't express your emotions so openly. And it's like, I'm a fucking kid, like I can't help it. And I think over time, movement has been a really important thing for me. And it's funny because I like, I know you dance, I do dance, but I do like a lot of, I've also realized like with the moon and the, you know, Mars and moon mutual reception is like, you have to find movement practices that like fit your lifestyle and
Right.
also make you, like, for me it's definitely like I have to find a way for me to access my emotions, because it's so like with that Scorpio moon, it's just like it won't get out unless I like poke at it and like tend to it in a way that's
Mm-hmm.
meaningful. And it's also like, you know, with the Scorpion, it's with Scorpio, it's like it's just so extreme, and it's so like I always like to explain to clients that I see Scorpio as night Mars, in that it's a tactician, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not, it's you know, it's the tactical Mars. It is the, instead of the, you know, like Aries, this one is an Aries rising, my dog. And he's, you know, Aries Mars is kind of like a day Mars of like, I'm just a soldier rushing into war. I like to always say it's like a baby with like an axe. And it's like,
Ooh.
maybe you shouldn't have that axe. You're a baby.
It
Like,
feels very much like Jon Snow in that game of, is it Battle of the Bastards, or I forget the name of the episode, but like his brother just gets shot by an arrow, who's been taken captive, and then he's just like fuck it and just charges
yeah,
into battle. And that feels very like very Aries culture in general, of
yeah,
like, let's just fucking go, like let's just
yeah,
charge into battle at the front of the line, like
exactly.
we're in the vanguard.
And it's like I'm like, and accessing the emotions from this like night Mars place of like the tactician. It's like Aries is sent out to kind of like fuck around and find out and like rush off into war, and like that pure rush of anger and like and movement. And like I feel like Scorpio Mars is like, I don't have that much energy. I
Mm-hmm.
don't got the energy to do this. So if I'm gonna make a move, it's gonna be pointed at a certain, like I have to make sure it's precise. I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna take all this time to obsess over it so it is precise and accurate, and that I'll win.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it, yeah, it's definitely like one of those things where it's like that Scorpio moon. I guess like McKenzie, it's a little different for you because you do so many things,
Well,
so many types of movement.
I think what you said though specifically about here, like I don't have the energy, so I'm gonna make this very precise. The other
Yeah,
end of that is even if you do have the energy, I'm not gonna waste it on being inaccurate.
yeah,
Why would I do anything if I'm not gonna do it right?
yes.
Mm.
That's definitely like a thing. And especially with like for me, the Cancer Mars and the Scorpio moon reception experience is like, number one, like why the fuck am I gonna waste energy on like something that I'm not gonna be good at right away?
Mm.
And then it's also like an ADHD thing and like a bunch of things. But it's like, if I'm not gonna be good at it, like why am I trying? So it's like whenever
Mm.
I try something, it's like I do a lot of research ahead of time to be like, I think I can do this. I think it's fine. But then it's also like, and I'm getting to the Cancer Mars portion because I really don't think we can talk about our, you know, moons without the Mars piece of it.
Of course.
But like my Cancer Mars, because it's a place of like fall as well, it's just interesting to like access that and be like, I don't really make moves unless it's like I don't get angry, I don't really get frustrated when it's something about myself and my body, which is like such a fallen experience. But I also see Cancer Mars as like a mama bear, you know,
Mm.
like it's like, oh, you're gonna screw with like things I love and like the people I love and like all these things I love, I will bite. It's like I will bite and I will like fucking destroy you.
Mm.
So it's just this like wave of, I always get like these big waves of like frustration and anger directed towards on behalf of other people, directed towards whatever. And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like when it comes to myself, it's like, oh, I don't really see, it's like I don't really see myself. And I think this is also a fallen moon experience for me of like, I don't really tend to my own emotions as much, and like I will do like in favor of myself. I just don't get angry because it's like life is short and like why?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I gotta be chill, bruh. But yeah, no, that Cancer Mars is like when I get mad, I get fucking mad. I
Mm.
also box, so like that's how I get my emotions out for
Right,
movement
you're a
practice.
martial artist, yeah.
Yeah.
I think a big thing with that is like that tending to others' emotions, a part of that is because you know that you can handle it.
Yeah.
A part of the fallen moon experience is, you know, being able to deal with pain in all ways. And you recognize that you are perhaps have been brought into the world more prepared to deal with this. And so why would you tend to yourself when you know that you're going to be okay, when you know that you're going to be able to protect yourself, take care of yourself, wrap up your emotions in any way? Others might not have like the training or the bandages necessary to wrap up their emotional wounds. And so it's like, I'm going to do what I can to help others take care of that, because they might not have hurt as bad as I have. And if they haven't, then I can help them through it. Which sounds like very martyr-esque in a way, like, oh, I'll sacrifice myself for the cause. But it's not about the glory. It's more about making sure that others don't feel pain the way that you have.
It's the managing of like, I mean, I think this is all, I have a fall. I'm like, I like to say, like, if an astrologer tried to elect a time for a talisman, mine would be like a cursed one, right? Because I have like my planets in fall, we're like not in dignity in any way. And I do feel like the fallen moon experience is this whole thing of like, and fallen placements in general, it's like, it is the planet still trying to do its job in an environment that's hostile to them. And so it's like, yeah, there is a lot more pain. We're better equipped for it. And I tell my clients this all the time, because I do get a lot of like charts like mine. Conversely, when I do get really dignified planets charts, it's just like so funny, because it's like, oh, I know why you're coming to me. It's because like you're well equipped to deal with these issues, like you've naturally been dealing with it, so when things are hard, they get super fucking hard, and you need like advice. And it's like, man, my fucking chart's been parched forever. It's like it exists in a desert, and I'm a watery motherfucker, so like I'm so sorry to everyone who's listening to this. I swear so much.
Yeah, it's okay. I just click a box that says explicit, and then we're all good.
I feel that hard though, especially about having a lot of clients that you either get that are like super dignified or super debilitated. Because like I'm very much the same way. Like over half my chart is in a technically debilitated place. And so you get a lot of that similar struggle of that feeling of being in the trenches. And I do feel like that is something that the fallen moon is very well equipped with, because the moon has all of these significations that have to do with like our bodily wellness, like bar none, like, hi, how are you feeling? It's probably going to be a moon thing. You know, those feelings, whether it's like bodily or emotionally, those start with the moon at the very beginning. And when you have moon, I like to say moon in struggle. That's like my favorite thing is like, I have moon in Scorpio, it's moon in struggle. Because the moon, just how you said, she's functioning from a place that, you know, not comfortable, has to figure out a way to make it work. And that then facilitates being able to have to make it work in so many other areas of your life that you can then, advise and consult with people on.
Absolutely. Yeah, my mom just came and got the dog. Sorry, I just got distracted.
No, cool.
The doggo.
It's always important. This is going to be like such a dog episode because of Mars.
Well, Mars rules dogs.
I know. Mars rules dogs. Like we both have like, even if we just, bare minimum had like moon in Scorpio, but like we also have the Mars factor, for both of us. And we're both such dog people. Like we have dogs, all of that. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting with Christa because there's this 4th house, 12th house connection. And I feel, Christa, I don't know if you relate to like the 4th house being like the family and the home and what have you, but also kind of like the most internal place psychologically.
It's the underworld.
Yeah, which you kind of describe like it's the inaccessibility of emotions, especially at a particular age. And then McKenzie, you have this kind of 12th house, 6th house connection with Mars and joy, 6th house being the house of, kind of like pets, small animals. I know how important your dogs are to you. So yeah, there's this really interesting kind of dark house connection as well.
My Mars and my Mercury are both at 20 degrees in Taurus. And so I very often say that one of my dogs is my Mercury and one of my dogs is my Mars. Because that's very much the two of their personalities. And, just like planets that are conjunct, they're together all the time. They literally they don't like not being together. And yet they could not be more different at times. And so, they're my pets, but they're literally like my children, which that follows when your fifth house is Aries and it's ruled by your Mars in the sixth. Fifth house ruled by a sixth house planet, your pets are going to be like your kids, very, very viscerally. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And I'm curious how both of you think about the 12th house, if you could kind of throw out some thoughts or keywords about that so that listeners can kind of understand how you look at that place.
I have this thing that I like to call my cocoon, and I love to go there. It's soft and comfortable. And it's the 12th house. You go there and you get stuck because it can feel really comfortable to get lost in it. And then all of a sudden you'll realize you're lost in it and you can't get out. And it's both for me, this great comfort of solitude. Because I'm very good at being alone. My moon in the 12th is fallen. It's a survival skill. It's a tactic to stay alive. When you can't feel, when things get rough, you shut it out and you go there and you stay there. And that has been, some of the most, I would say, potent healing that I've done at times is those moments that I take to actually be alone and to process, not just for a moment, but for time, And so, but it also gets very lonely when you shut yourself out and you don't allow yourself to have connection, especially when it's from that very fallen place of, I don't want anyone to feel the pain that I'm feeling. So I just am not gonna let anyone have any connection to it at all. And it can get very lonely in this place, but it's also, at least for me, the safest place that I know. So
I think that's beautiful that you said that, but I also think it's funny the way that I relate to it, because it's definitely I avoid the 12th house. My Mars is there and it's I do not see it. I don't want to acknowledge you. I think for me, when I think of the 12th house, it's definitely I am one of my partner's 12th house placements. And it's so funny to watch that happen, because it's we're so excited. It's like a cocoon, right? It's so fun to be with them, but they relate to me how they're so excited to hang out with me, but every single time they're so excited to hang out with me that they jump the gun. And then they're like, oh my God, yes, come over. And then they realize, oh, wait, I have shit to do. And having you come over is going to make me not focus on that shit. And so then they get anxious because they're like, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to get this shit done. And it's oh, okay. So you're literally you wanna you're gonna shut me out, or they're gonna I am their undoing of all this productivity. But to be fair, that's the Mercury placement. And I'm their Mercury placement.
I feel that though, you yourself being the undoing, because I have literally had partners tell me that, oh my God, this is just going to be my undoing. I literally had a friend in college because I was seeing someone that they were also really good friends with, and they were like, you just sucked out his soul. And I was like, geez, thanks.
That's rough to hear.
It is. And it was even worse because they meant it in both a good and bad way. And I was would have been nicer if you just meant one or the other, honestly.
Okay.
The non-duality of man, though. You can be all things.
True.
Well, it's interesting because I think people on Twitter, you see people throw out if you have 12th house synastry with someone, no go, don't do it. But how have y'all found a way, Christa, with you and your partner, how have you found a way to kind of manage that, or I don't know, work with that energy? I don't mean it to sound super woo-woo like that, but
no, I get it. It's just definitely you have to be conscious of it, right? And it's communication is a huge thing. I mean, regardless of 12th house issues. I think it's like, especially because I know I'm this person's like 12th house Mercury placement. It's like, it's so fun, but it's also so important to communicate like, hey, you know, like I didn't understand that like being so excited to hang out with them, they'd be anxious and nervous because they wouldn't get stuff done. And they had like this huge deadline for something. And it's like, all right, well, you just tell me then. It's like, I am trying to be supportive of you. I am going to, and this is also like the Scorpio moon thing of like, it's I think it took a lot of time too, because it's like, oh, you don't like my Scorpio moon. It's like a little wounded child with that Cancer Mars. It's like, oh my God, you don't want to hang out with me all the time. Like, what the fuck? Like, why are you not as obsessed with me? Which is also like a Scorpio Venus thing. But I think it's just the knowledge of like, okay, like we have to sit down and like fuck around and find out. It's really like, you know, it's funny, for as much as I avoid the 12th house and those placements, it's like the more you avoid things, and like this is like attachment theory and stuff, it's like the more you avoid things, the worse it gets. And so it's kind of like you just have to embrace it, and like if it's an undoing, it's an undoing of something that will lead to another productive space or place. So I just trust the process, and like it really is like, instead of hiding, I am like, okay, like tell me how you feel, tell me like what about this arrangement is not working for you. And you know, I guess in that space it's like, yes, you need your solitude for like X, Y, and Z. You need to be in your 12th house to like be able to like get shit done. And it's also just reaching a place, because this is like, I'm polyamorous, so like this is with my other partners. I've been with my like spouse for like 9 years, so it's not as big of a problem. But it is just the process of like getting to know someone, how their habits are, and like coming from a 12th house place where they like to hide those things, being the person to encourage some of that to come out in a meaningful way. Like it just has to be like, you just have to fuck around and find out, you know, like it's if you avoid it, it's not good. So it's like, just like I said, I'm a very avoidant person. I'm like a very attachment wise, I'm like a disorganized attached person. I'm anxious and I'm avoidant. So it's working with those things.
Ain't that some shit, you know?
Love that for me. We love trauma.
For me too. Yeah.
We love trauma in this house. In that like dealing with it and coping with it. Great. Right. But I think with those 12 house placements, it is like, it's okay for you to do everything in moderation, like isolate yourself in moderation, but it's like when it gets to a point where it's affecting your relationship with others, like you need to take a look. You need to take a hard look at it.
Right.
You know, I did just start seeing a new therapist, so we're working on it.
Hell yeah.
Love that. Me too.
Love that. Yeah, I guess it's interesting. So when my partner and I first got together, we were figuring out his birth time, and the moon moves from Libra to Scorpio on that day. And I straight up told him, I was like, you do not have moon in Libra. I know you were born after this point in the afternoon when the moon changed signs. And he's like, are you sure? I was like, I don't need to know anything else about you. I can promise you that I'm sure.
Now, if you may, what characteristics in him make that distinction for you?
Oh, this is super interesting. So my dad has the moon in Libra, and a couple of my best friends do, and so I'm very intimately well versed in it. But I've never had any romantic attachment of any sort to a person with moon in Libra. And the friends that I do have that have moon in Libra, I could never in a million years imagine being with them, because there is just a level of okayness that I will never be. And I love them all dearly. And that's, my dad, I would say, had a skill for avoiding emotions at times that were, that were unpleasant. He was very well versed in sharing, experiencing, knowing about good emotions, but bad emotions was a struggle. And that also, like, my dad had moon in Libra and my mom has like moon in Taurus. So both of them have Venus ruled moons. Right. The bad emotions are not something that they really worked with. And so that left me to figure everyone's bad emotions out for all of us. And so understanding from a very like early age, like the intensity of that, and like understanding that would before I had the astrological language to speak it, knowing that intensity of emotion was something that I was going to require in a partner. And I've had multiple partners who do have moon in Scorpio as well. I'm also poly. And so, like some of my favorite, most beloved partners have had moon in Scorpio. And so whenever him and I first started talking and seeing each other and getting to know each other, it became very clear very quickly that there is no possible way that he had moon in Libra. And there were two different sort of disputed times, like a birth certificate time and then the time that his mom swears he was born, which are about an hour or two off. Both of them are after the moon moved into Scorpio. And the time that we rectified and worked with is kind of in between there. So yeah. And with him, we do have a very, I wouldn't necessarily say like emotionally intense relationship. But we talk about them. And for people that don't do that, that is intense for them, right? You know? But for us that's the normal. He's the first partner that I've ever had that like will see me just crying about something and doesn't tell me to stop crying. Because that doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means that I have to process the emotion, and that's a way that I do it. But he isn't like scared of that. And you said, Christa, something about like trauma. And I do think that is a big fallen moon experience. It's like the trauma, the fear, the failure, the fear of failure, the fear of like exposing your trauma for people to see, and all of that, and how that like ties in with any partner that you have that has to be, you know, talked about, has to be discussed, has to have like, I would say, like, to use kind of like the Mars analogies, it has to be an even playing field. You know, both sides of the battlefield have to be well equipped to face the problem, because you're not battling each other, you're battling the thing.
Yeah, and that's like very couples therapy stuff too. I relate to that in a way when you're talking about Libra moon, because my mother is a Libra moon with a Scorpio sun. So it's very much this like, and like I said, like I have a Libra sun, Scorpio moon. So it's very much this like watching her like hide her emotions, and like watching her instead of dealing with hard emotions. I saw my mom earlier this like year, very unexpectedly, because like something happened in the family and she came up, and like watching that happen, like watching her like process her emotions. And you know, like my partner, my spouse was with me, and it was just so funny because my spouse has a Pisces moon. Both of my like main partners have Pisces moons, which is also crazy, but like very helpful for the fallen moon experience. Yeah, I know.
My brother has a Pisces moon.
I've tried to avoid Jupiter for so long, but he gives me his children. But yeah, so watching a Libra moon try to process their emotions, and like it's so funny because my mother like just avoids them. She like the way that she processes her emotions is through a pleasurable thing, which is like she goes shopping. She shops. Like she's like, I have to deal with all these uncomfortable emotions. Like, no, instead of doing that, I'm going to do something pleasurable and like aesthetically pleasing that will give me something, because Venus ruled moons, you know, more. And then it's funny because I'm like in her fifth house, right? And so it's like, I'm going to do that for my child. I'm going to give my child all these things. And like, so it's a weird, like we enable each other and our shopping habits. Like it's bad, but that's the way we cope with our emotions. And it's also like, I've had really good conversations with my mom as an adult over like shopping, you know, like it's a way for us to like step out, bring her in a more comfortable space, and to process uncomfortable things with also allowing, I have to pair it up with a pleasing experience, you know?
Interesting. Whereas for you, and I'm saying this because I kind of relate to this, you process emotions by like getting punched in the face.
Yeah. Or like getting punched in the face, or like just sit. Meditation has really helped with this. And like, also, I guess just like dating Pisces moons, where like Pisces moons like fucking want to cry all the time. But like they drown in their emotions, you know, like it's just an ocean, and they just don't
the oceanic feeling is like can be overwhelming. Yeah,
and it's like, I don't want to share these things with you unless I'm like really positive I feel them, You know, it's
Mhm.
like, and I feel like Pisces moons are like, my feelings change all the time.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't care. Like, I'll tell you how I'm feeling because like it's gonna change in like 5 minutes.
Mhm.
And it's like for Scorpio moons, especially the martial quality of it is like, I hold on. I can hold a motherfucking grudge like
Period.
forever.
Period.
If and like we were talking earlier before we recorded about how like the eclipse season was fucking hard for me because like I lost a lot of friendships and I had to cut a lot of friendships off. And like
Mm.
I think it's also this like Scorpio moon thing of like I've been through so much fucking shit, and like the martial quality of like Scorpio moons know how to cut a motherfucker off.
It ain't
Like
nothing to cut that bitch off.
yeah, like it like if you screw with me and you wrong me or like people I love in a like very potent way, I will, and I've gotten better at it over the years, but it's like I will cut you off. I will cut you off. Like I'm very like succinct, and I don't know if you have this, McKenzie, because like I'm just like very cold too, where it's like if you screwed with me and like I will be like, here are the facts. This is what I lay down for you, and I'm like, this is why I'm ending this thing because I'm like, it was disrespectful. It was rude. I would never be friends with someone who like did this to me, right? Or like said certain things about me. And that's also probably the Venus being like co-present with the moon of
Mhm.
like in, you know, like in debilitated of like, this is not how I deal with one-on-one relationships. And like you fucked up. And so it's like,
Mhm.
I don't need to have that in my life. The precision at which Scorpio placements can cut things off, I really, really admire.
Yeah.
But it's hard because you hold on to that and then it's sad. And then you have to deal with the sadness.
Yeah, again, like you said, like Aries is Jon Snow running out into battle, but like, yeah, Scorpio is like the assassin in the dark,
Mm-hmm.
with precision and yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. I have a similar thing like relationally. So for me, that cutoff feeling is very internal. I'm not the best at like describing that to others, but I'm good at understanding what it means for me. And more so, and this is probably because my Venus is in Gemini, I enjoy having relationships with everyone to some degree, but I'm very good at internally placing my boundaries for how much I share. And for me, like part of that full moon experience is like showing that vulnerability and exposing that. And people have literally told me that I'm good at making them feel comfortable with being vulnerable themselves. But yet for me, like from my perspective, I'm like, oh, you thought that was bad? That was merely a fraction of the depths of my feelings, but yet it's enough to connect. It's enough
Mhm.
to show that you're willing to go there. Even though for others, it's like, oh shit, that was deep. And I was like, that was a flashlight. You need a spotlight to see how deep we can actually go. And so I have felt that I'm very good at like maintaining relationships, even when I have felt there has been like cut off energy. It's like, I'm not actually going to cut you out of my life. Sometimes I do, of course, that happens. But a lot of the times it's not necessarily cutting someone out of my life. It's cutting off ways that I'm vulnerable to them. Yeah.
Access.
It's cutting off the access. It's cutting off like channels of vulnerability that they once had that I'm like, actually, you don't have access to that anymore. That one, like that, like underground passageway has been blocked off.
Mm.
I think that was a Saturn lesson for me after my Saturn return. It was more of like, because I'm so quick to like, you did this to me, fuck you, bye.
Mhm.
And it's, working with my therapist on it in romantic relationships of not cutting people off too fast when they
Mhm.
wrong me, because inherently relating to something isn't comfortable, and there will be like miscommunications and moments where you get,
And just to point out the chart detail without giving maybe too much away, but malefic out of sect in a relational house, we'll say.
yes.
Yeah.
It's rough. I mean, I don't mind. I have Saturn's like really close to my descendant. So it's like it is a mirror like no other.
Mm.
But I think the Mars, especially the Mars in the 12th and like the moon in the 4th, um it is very trigger happy of like cut things off that make you feel uncomfortable, instead of just like blocking off access.
Mhm.
But I did want to point out something that you said, McKenzie, because I have this thing especially with me, where I'm like, do you attract a lot of, this is just for me specifically, so I wanted to know, like, I think it's funny because it's like, as a Scorpio moon, because I like hide so many of my emotions, I do attract a lot of Scorpio risings. Like I have a significant amount of Scorpio risings in my life who like kind of fall within like the you know, like where my moon placement is. And it's just like, I think there's something about the Scorpio moon when you give access and like when you like are able to illuminate some of those qualities and like those emotions to people, there is this understanding that they're like, oh my God, you feel like home to me, especially because I also have it, you know, on my IC. So it's like, I feel like a lot of the Scorpio risings with significant Scorpio placements, I have a lot of Scorpio risings with Venus on the ascendant in my life, like weirdly. And yeah, I know it's Mars for Mars, Venus is chef's kiss. I won't expose my partner's charts, but both of them have Martial Venuses. So
we can't expose the Scorpio risings. Absolutely not.
No, I can't. That partner made me guess. This is how you get an astrologer, just sidebar. This is how you get an astrologer to date you, is you do not tell them anything about your chart.
Prerequisite also, you have to be a Scorpio rising because they're the ones that are going to do this.
And I would never. Honestly, I would literally be like, oh, you want to keep secrets from me? Not going to waste my time.
It was a fun game.
Sag rising culture for sure.
Sag rising culture. I will not give a single fuck. You don't want to reveal your secrets? Gotta go. No time for that shit. Better, bigger and better somewhere else.
It was so funny because I instantly, once they said like, oh, you don't like getting to know people's stuff, or like you like, I'm gonna make you guess, and I'm like, I hate this bullshit. I was like, I hate this. And I was like, you have to have a Scorpio placement somewhere. It's either, and then yeah, I was like, I was between two, and I think within like, they told me within a month of us like seeing each other, but I got it within 2 weeks.
Nice.
I get, so being a Sag rising, I'm very biased. I think that there is like, and maybe it's also because I have the Scorpio moon, but like the solidarity between Sag and Scorpio risings is next level. And so I get a lot of Scorpio risings, but then also just like Scorpio placements in general, like Sun, Mercury, Venus. I have one of my really good friends. I love her dearly. Like as soon as I met her, I was like, we're best friends now. She has Moon and Jupiter in Scorpio, like both like conjunct mine, but she's a Gemini rising.
Wow.
And so literally as soon as I met her, I was like, we're besties. Glad you also recognize it. But yeah, I have quite a few friends that have actually Jupiter in Scorpio right around the placement of my moon, because that was only a few years before I was born. And so like they're some of my best friends. And so yeah, like lots of that good, because that is really the feeling. It's like, for me, it's not just like, for you probably like the more home feeling because it's your fourth house, but for me it's that very like vulnerable feeling of like, you see me for my depths, like you see my scars, you see my wounds. I don't even have to unwrap them for you. You just have like night vision goggles and you can see them already. And so it's that immediate vulnerability and familiarity that comes super naturally. And also, Christa, I want to just like piggyback on something you said earlier about the Venus ruled moon thing, and like from a like parental perspective, especially like the moon has so much to do with not just motherhood, but how we're raised, you know, what we learn and what we come into this world knowing, and how that conditioning then like affects us through like parents and how they take care of us. Because both my parents, having Venus ruled moons, they did not talk about their feelings. When they got into an argument, they bought each other shit. Like that's how they said sorry. That's how they talked about their emotions and let the other know they were okay, is they used money and things and feel good experiences. Like I grew up very rock and roll. My parents were both musicians. They loved going to concerts, like taking me to festivals, like essentially experiencing and dancing and music and art and all of these things that are amazing, wonderful things. But that was at times very much a placeholder for the emotional depth and communication of how things really felt that I was so deeply craving.
Placeholder for like actually connecting on a one-to-one level with those those important people in your life.
Yeah, like, and connecting in a way that felt uncomfortable. You know, we were great. We were great at comfortable connections. We could do that all day. Like, my parents didn't have an issue telling me they loved me. They told me a lot that they loved me. They showed me a lot. But it wasn't the kind of love that I always needed, because I needed something more uncomfortable. I needed to talk about pain and discomfort and anger. But those weren't topics that felt safe, because they weren't things that I like. How could I bring up a topic with someone that has no language themselves to speak about it? Because it's something that they're so uncomfortable with. How can they even give me any guidance when they aren't even doing it for themselves? And I don't blame them for that. It's just something that growing up, I realized that both my parents having Venus ruled moons and then my brother having moon in Pisces, I was the emotional processor, the emotional regulator for the household. And I was the one that had to do essentially, because I was like the youngest. My older brother, he moved out when I was younger. And so we have a little age gap. And so my formative teenage years, it was just me and my parents. And so having those times to really understand and be like, oh shit, I'm doing the legwork on the feelings here, and I'm doing the weightlifting of the innards.
It reminds me of that quote by Wittgenstein, the philosopher, of the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. And so it's that is a very Scorpio moon thing of I need, and it's also I relate to that in a way of I need to have comfort with the discomfort, and it's also I student of Buddhism, I meditate a lot, and learning more about that is I need to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. It's also why I started getting to death work. It's just because there are these things we don't talk about, right? And there's these things that I've seen so many people, so many families be affected by this whole not being able to talk about what happens after, and what happens after you lose someone, or what the plans are to mitigate all this, because most of the drama that comes from funerals and deaths is just people haven't talked about it, right? And so it's I see a lot of that as someone who has worked in healthcare and has also worked with dying people. It is, and having that experience in my personal life of watching my family be caretakers, right? It's you have to learn how to be comfortable with the uncomfortable, because if you don't, the Venus ruled moons, it's that benefic is just we just don't want to talk about the uncomfortable things. Yeah. And it's okay, that's, the thing is my experience is a little different from you, McKenzie, because both my parents have Scorpio Venuses. I inherited that. My brother also has a Cancer Mars, so we're little bitches to each other. It's so funny. It is the funniest thing. It's so hilarious. But it is this being in this very kind of benefic and mercurial household of mine that I grew up in. Is it's funny because it's the language wasn't there of all these uncomfortable things, and my parents really took steps for avoiding uncomfortable situations because they didn't know how to bring it up. And I also think when that happens, it's because they don't have the language themselves to be able to cope with it. And once they are able to finally admit it, they realize, that this is something I actually have to cope with, and it's real for me now. So now I actually have to process my emotions in a real and meaningful way.
Oh, I resonate with that a lot. Cause my mom has Venus in Scorpio, but that's the only debilitated planet that was in our household besides all of mine. My brother, my mom, and my dad both had dignified Jupiters, Saturns, and other planets as well. And so it was that experience of literally there not being language to talk about it. The conceptualization of things just not being good all the time was hard to grasp. And then that's not to say that there weren't struggles. There weren't times of hearing arguments about different things. That wasn't to say that things were always good, but talking about them was a different story than them just existing under the layers of potentially like language or consciousness to be able to handle it. That's been something, and I think that is a very mirrored experience that we have, both of us having such debilitated charts, but then having such dignity all around us in other ways too, and having to process that and understand that, and understand how our view of the world is just so inherently different, not in a bad way, in a way that just simply is.
Yeah, McKenzie, I mean, we don't have to talk about this if you are uncomfortable with it, but the topic of death is coming up, and I know that we kind of have a similar shared experience of our fathers passing away. For me, it was when I was like 15, and I think for you it might have been a little bit later, but I, thinking back on that experience, like really respect the way that my parents handled it and talked to me about it, even though like my dad got sick for the first time when I was 8, and then he got sick again when I was 14 and passed shortly thereafter. But I can imagine it was incredibly difficult to be in a household where the difficult things might not have been discussed. And is that resonant at all? I'm also mindful of astrologically the moon in your 12th ruling your 8th. So
yeah, I'm okay with talking about it. My dad passed very, very suddenly. So he passed of a heart attack. So there was no warning signs. There was no anything. Looking back, like at photos, he did have some like health problems, like his cholesterol, blood pressure, stuff like that. And so you could kind of tell that it like was adding up, but for all intents and purposes, it was out of nowhere. And I guess just to let people know, like the vulnerable timeline of things, my parents loved each other a lot, but they also, probably said some things to me that they shouldn't have, which is like when they were angry, they would say I was the only reason that they were together. And then I graduated college in December of 2016, and by April of 2017, they were officially divorced. So it happened immediately after. And then 1 year later, in April of 2018, my dad suddenly died. So it was all very compacted together, trauma-wise, timeline-wise. Like I had not yet even really begun to process my parents' divorce and then my dad was gone, and there was no warning. There was no chance to say goodbye. There was nothing like that. Although looking back on it, I truly do believe that when I left his house, whenever I was visiting him up in my hometown in Indiana, and I was coming back to where I live in Florida, I had just seen him maybe 2 weeks before he passed. And he had never cried so hard when I had left before. And I truly do believe something in him knew that it was the last hug. And so I've been very unlucky to have some friends that I grew up with pass away from suicides or overdoses of things of the sort that have made me comfortable and aware of death and grief in a very intimate way, but nothing at all like having my dad there one day and like me looking at his text and then an hour later getting a call that the ambulance was there and he was already gone. And so it was literally that fast. And it's definitely been a long journey of like getting to a point when I actually even feel aware that he is dead. Because there's a part of me for a very long time that was in huge denial about like, and it's not that I didn't know that he was dead. It was the denial of the spiritual differences in my connection with him afterwards that took a while to truly come into relationship with, and to understand that like I was feeling and perceiving and connecting with him differently. That I actually had to let myself go through the trenches to get there and to feel like, okay, I can go there and then I can pull myself out of it, and I can choose when I go there healthily, because I know what it feels like to go there unhealthily and to be in such a deep place with no way out, that now I have to maintain the light at the end of the tunnel. I have to know that I can, put the lantern on the wall and just let it sit there, and that I can get out eventually without feeling like I'm trapped there. Because it took a very long time to not feel trapped by the recognition of mortality for a long time after that. I had extreme fear of my own mortality for a long time after that. And being, maybe this is just because my parents were both musicians. Like, obviously we've heard a lot about musicians that die at 27. I have, I guess, gone through like 3 of the 4 major like yield adult transits, like progress lunar return. I'm in my nodal reversal. I'm in my 4th house here because I'm 27 and I'm still just waiting for Saturn now. And so Saturn. I feel like I've been ready for years at this point, but still, Daddy's still coming. Daddy's still coming. I still got a little bit of time still. It doesn't really feel like that though, because I've been in like the Saturn perfection years and stuff. But after my dad passed, I had this feeling in my head of just, I don't know where it came from. It was just something that came to me, and it was like, if I survive 27, then I know I will have done good. Because like musicians having passed at 27, just like culturally hearing about that through their like memoirs, other people talking about it, and then also like astrologically understanding everything that comes with that, and feeling that like if I make it out alive, I will be doing good. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you so much for
thanks for
sharing that. I can only imagine, you know, and it's interesting to hear about the ways that these kinds of things affect us, because my dad passed when he was like 52, but he had a long illness. I've had my uncles, his brothers, like have all passed except one, and so like I'm trying to like live a very healthy lifestyle to try and have longevity past a certain age, and I also have fears of like not being able to make it, you know what I mean? And so it's just interesting to hear how those similar kind of things, you know, confronting mortality, experiencing it in a loved one, how that kind of manifests for you. So yeah, thanks for sharing.
Powerful. I mean, I'm so sorry that you both went through that. And it's like, I am lucky enough to have both of my parents, but it is interesting and to relate how both of you experienced like the grief and like the mortality. And like part of it is like, I had to watch my parents go through that. My dad especially go through that with his parents, or his dad really. And like when my grandfather died, it was really hard. And he had Parkinson's and like was just declining for years. And watching kind of like listening and relating to that experience for both of you is kind of like, oh, okay, now I can see why he might have reacted the way that he did. He didn't have the like language to personally equip himself with. And like, you know, my grandfather was like the patriarch of our family. And man, I wish I knew that man's chart. It's just like when you're that old, like you do not have accurate anything birth, like anything, like we didn't even know his real birthday, you know? But it is interesting to relate to that. And that's kind of why I wanted to get into death work too, is like people, like especially Western culture, like we're really just not equipped to talk about it because we want to avoid how unpleasant it is. And it's like, for me anyway, like with all the death work stuff that I've been doing and have done over the past couple of years, part of it is also to relieve myself of that anxiety of like, because I'm like, you know, like I, along with being healthy and trying to be healthy, it's like genetics prevails. Right. So I do, you know, I'm chronically ill, I'm disabled. But it is one of those things of like, okay, like I have these things. How am I going to manage and deal with all of this like hard admin shit so that like whatever future, like my children, my like, you know, my other family members, so they can cope, because like that's where like 90% of fights get into, is like after the deaths of like this inheritance, this blah 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 blah. It's like if you just talked about it without that, I think more exposure, and this is back to our like attachment stuff of like, if you avoid something, you're not going to know, you have to communicate. So I think for me, it's like, I really grown into just talking about it, and it doesn't ease the discomfort of like mortality, right? But it's like, if you have the language, if you start to expose yourself to things more, and one of the things that I think is very morbid about having a Scorpio moon and a Scorpio Venus is like, I say constantly, as someone who is polyamorous and like has a lot of relationships and is constantly like trying to balance a lot of things at once, is like, and also dealing with the discomfort of feeling, right, is like, when you love something, you're opening yourself up to loss, right? You're opening yourself up to loss. You're opening yourself up to like being vulnerable, right? Like, even if you know, if you're not going to lose someone because you break up, or because you like, because you are, they go away, that you lose them in death, you know? And it's a hard thing to deal with, but I think given the depth of that and like given how intense that does feel, I think it like for a Scorpio moon, that kind of message lands harder with me because it's like, okay, this will explain and also normalize and also like kind of dampen the intense feelings I have for people. Like it's like, okay, like the reason you feel so much and the reason it feels so like it's like the end of the world almost sometimes when I get lost in my emotions is more of like, no, it's because you fucking care. Like you love so hard and strong that like of course it's gonna feel hard when you lose something. But it's like that's the act of loving something, is like you are opening yourself up to vulnerability and loss.
Yeah, I don't remember where I heard it. I think it actually might have been Carol Ann that said this. And it was the thing of like, you know that you love something when you're like, when you know the thing that hurts them and you choose not to do it. Like you wield the knife and you put it away. Like they give you access to it. They literally hand it to you and they're like, this is where it will hurt the most. And you decide not to do it. And it's that feeling of like knowing what hurts so bad and knowing that you love them enough not to go there, but also like love and loss go hand in hand. They truly do. And like, you know that you are truly connected to something when you're scared of losing it, when you're fearful that eventually you will hurt or they will hurt or some hurt will come to both of you through it, because of just unavoidable relational circumstances that happen when you connect with people. And how it still doesn't make it any easier though, hypothetically it should, you can think about it, but feelings aren't necessarily logical, especially for a fallen moon. Finding like your way to make sense of things is just feeling it. You're not going to be able to logic yourself out of being hurt.
You just have to, I think that is one of like the Scorpio moon lessons that you just have to kind of learn, where it's like, God, I hate feeling this so much. And then it's like, well, you can't just shit out the emotion. You know what I mean? Like you have to like process it and like let it go through.
Has to be digested.
Yeah, you have to digest it.
Like literally.
You can't just diarrhea it out.
Yeah, you have to actually marinate in it.
Yeah.
That's how you get the nutrients out of it.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like that's when, when people ask me like, what are my practices for like anger or sadness? And I'm like, I just sit in it. Like I let myself feel it, because I'm like, if I don't, I'm going to start overthinking, and sometimes that happens anyway when you sit in it, but it's just like, it's healthier for me to sit in it and process it in a way. So it's like, I don't know about y'all, but I'm like, for me as a Scorpio moon, it's like learning how to deal with my emotions and sitting with it. It's like, I literally will sit and like, I tell my friends all the time, I'm like, when I'm sad, when I start busting out like these very nostalgic, and this is also like Cancer Mars of like the nostalgia factor, especially in the 12th. It's like, and like, 4th house Scorpio moon. It's like, I will listen to all, like, if I'm listening to the High School Musical soundtracks, I'm sad and depressed. I'm upset. Like if I listen to Adele, which I never listen to Adele unless I'm super depressed. If I pull out Joni Mitchell Blue, like, I am sad. So it's like, I'll listen to this stuff. If I'm angry, like I'll go boxing, I'll go boxing and I'll scream and I'll like, I'll play angry music. So just sit with it. Yeah.
I very much feel the same way. Like I have to feel it. And my partner is very Virgo. And so he has the Scorpio moon, but he's also very Virgo. And he is blissfully solution oriented. And so when I'm feeling things, he is very quick to be like, all right, problem solving. And I've gotten better at being able to tell him like, I'm not in the space for problem solving. I'm still in feeling mode. Like I'm not receptive to solutions right now because I'm still feeling the feeling so deeply. And maybe you even have a better idea of what I'm feeling because I've just been word vomiting it to you, but I still haven't gotten the picture yet. And so I have to wrap my noggin around it and like process it and be in it for long enough to know how the fuck I can move from there to be responsive or receptive whatsoever to improvements or solutions or things that could help, even though usually really good fucking ideas, but not ideas that I'm ready for yet.
That's such a Scorpio moon thing too. Like there's so many, and I didn't learn this until one of my friends who is a Virgo, like not a Virgo, she's a Leo, but has like a Virgo moon and like Virgo rising, where it was so interesting of like having the language to be like, hey, I'm venting to you. I'm talking to you in this way where I'm like, I just need someone to listen to me. Like I need to get my feelings out. I am not in a solutions oriented state yet. And so it's been so nice to like talk to my friends, because I'm like a lot, like one of my, I call, well, her, one of my best friends is like a younger version of me, and it's funny to like have her reflect back to me, but she's a Virgo, and so when I'm venting, she'll be like, well, why don't you do this? And I'm like, bitch, I am not in a state for like solutions oriented stuff right now. Like I just need you to listen. I need to be angry. I need to be like, I need to let my emotions out. So just let me do that. Just listen, shut up, let me do this. And then when I have processed through it, we can go to solutions oriented stage.
Yeah. I think this does speak to the, like, it's not just a fallen moon, but it's a fixed fallen moon. And so from the outside, others could probably perceive that like, oh, you're wallowing in it. You're just letting yourself stay upset. You just want to be upset. It's like, bitch, you think I want to feel shitty? You have the audacity to think that I would like to feel bad right now? No, it's just taking me this long to pull myself out of it. And sorry that it's literally like fucking thick ass mud that I'm trudging through. And for you, it's just a nice little pathway that you get to walk through to get to the other side of like processing and solving. But I'm like, I'm getting through the mud. Like I'm stuck in it. I am like very slowly trudging my way out. And like the perception of that being like, oh, you want to be in it, or because it does, it is a feelings, you can get stuck in them. You really can, but that doesn't mean that you want to be stuck in them. It just means that's what it takes to get through them.
I mean, as someone that grew up, like, especially like a assigned male at birth person that grew up in a very conservative kind of like, we don't talk about our feelings here. We don't talk about anything really here. Environment. It's like, my question is like, are you wallowing in it, or do we just live in an avoidant culture?
Both.
You know what I
mean? That part though.
Is it bad to be wallowing in it though? You know what
that.
I mean?
Right. Are you doing what's necessary for your emotional health?
Yes, exactly. And I think that's part of the things that's part of like fallen moon culture, is just like, I think because we struggle so hard because the moon is not struggling to do its job in the place it's in, it's very much like, okay, like maybe the way that you process things, you fucking Cancer moon, is not the way, like moon in domicile is not the way that I would. And it's also like, I love domicile moons because they can be just little bitches about everything. I'm pointing to my dog because my dog, Mayo. Both of my dogs are Libra suns, Cancer moons. It's crazy. And it's like, especially like when you see an animal who can't communicate in written language, or like written and spoken word, it's so funny to see like that, like, oh, your emotions are like on your face, like this dog is like angry and I can tell they're angry and they're upset. They're very emotionally expressive, where it's like, I don't necessarily have, I don't necessarily like, number one, it's like the Scorpio thing of like, I'm not letting, I mean, like McKenzie, you said you're a little different, but for me it's like, I'm not letting people see that, like when I'm angry or showing my emotions, because it is I don't think it's a sign of weakness, right? But it is like, I'm allowing someone to see myself at a vulnerable position. And I think with that, Mars moon stuff, it's like, I don't want people to see me in a place of vulnerability, because I don't want that to be used against me. And also like, I don't want it to be like, I don't want people to be like, you're being emotionally manipulative. And it's like, no, I'm just trying to express my feelings in a way that's healthy for me. And it's like, also, you haven't earned that access to me, which is such a fixed thing of like,
so Scorpionic too.
Yeah, I know. It's so like, don't look at me.
I relate to that, but then I think maybe it's because my Mars has the opposition, and so it's like the debilitated opposition versus trine, where there's a part of me that literally thinks like, what could I possibly show someone that they could use against me that I haven't already weaponized against myself already? Like,
Moon in the 12th.
It really is. Like, what could anyone else possibly do to me that I already haven't been my own worst enemy over already? Like, no matter what it is, whether that's like any emotions or even just like petty little like drama things, like what could anyone possibly do that would hurt me that I haven't already been through? And like, maybe that's cocky, but to me, that is just realistic of like, you like, and honestly, it's like, you really think you could do something that could hurt me worse than anything that I've already done to myself? Like, that's laughable. Truly. Like, that's my Gemini placements being like, that's a good laugh. Actually, that's a funny joke, because it doesn't feel, and it's not even a feeling of being like untouchable or anything like that. It's intimately knowing all of my, you know, all flaws. Yeah, my flaws, my fears, my trauma, everything so well that I'm like, yeah, I know it. What's the big fucking whoop? Like,
that's so funny to me in like a way that I relate, just because it's like, I think you do it in a way, especially with that opposition of like, especially the fixed opposition, where it's like, I know my shit, so I'm just gonna sit in my shit and I'm gonna allow myself to stew. Whereas like, you know, I have a fucking cardinal Mars where it's like, I will in the 12th. So it's like, when my emotions get too high, I will take action, like very spontaneously take action. And it's my undoing. Like, I can't lie, like being a little petty bitch, petty Mars, you know, petty Cancer Mars, especially like, it's so funny, like with I just think of childhood stories of like, my brother also has a Cancer Mars, and I didn't find that out until I like looked into the ephemeris. And then I was like, why are my brother and I such petty little bitches to each other? Like, we would my brother and I are also like a year and a half apart. We're literally like a year and a half apart.
The Mars cycle apart.
Oh, also we're both children of Venus. So I'm a Libra sun, he has a Taurus sun. And like, it's so funny because we're both like, I went home, and this is like, even in childhood, we would pinch each other, literally pinching, Cancer Mars. We would pinch each other. That was our way of fighting, because my parents would like, don't punch each other, and I'm like, all right, we'll just pinch really hard. And I'm like, that's so literal. But it's like, we got into a fight. He has a child and like a wife now. He's very happy. But it's like, I went home, and he was supposed to pick something up from our apartment that we were staying at. And he's like, oh, I can't do it because like my son is like crying. And I was like, all right, but we've been waiting here all day. And so we were going back home anyway. We brought his food over, and me being petty was like, it was like, I was bringing him like one of his favorite foods. It's like an acai bowl from this one place. And I froze everyone else's bowl because I was bringing it for the family, but I didn't do it with his. And so his was melting. I just put it in the fridge and his melted. And so I like, when I got home, I gave it to him, and I was like, here, I like gave him his wife's, like, that was frozen. His was like, I was like, you were being a little bitch, and like, you didn't show up when you said we were waiting for you. And then he's like, well, thanks for getting that. He's like, I have a child, but then he's like, and now I'm gonna make this child not like you. Like, he's like, I'm gonna teach my baby to hate you. And I was like, wow, that is mean. I mean, it was like being petty, but it's like, that's very much like Cancer Mars, right? Like, it's very much like, we're being petty to each other. We're gonna use these like things where I'm like, I love that child, I love that horse girl child. That I'm gonna say it right now, all Sag placements are horse girls.
Because they all got that fat ass.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that yet, right? But like, that baby is a horse girl. Literally, like, looks at a horse and just yells out neigh each time.
I'm such a horse girl too.
You are. You're such a Ken.
There are horses that live like a mile and a half from me, and I love going to see them.
This Ken's job is horse.
Every time I see them, I'm so excited. I also saw them. I also like played with them when I was like 4 years old. So I'm like, oh my God, it's like a full cycle. I'm like an adult person now, and the horses are still here, just like they were. the only people that have been there for me my whole life.
Yeah,
No,
the
I'm just kidding.
horses. The
I'm just
horses.
kidding.
The horses have been there. No one else. The horses.
I'm only kidding.
We live for
Are you
that.
though? Are you though?
Yeah,
Like
I am.
sad? Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting talking about like, just to bring forth like an example of kind of a famous Scorpio moon, because I was thinking about myself with Moon in the first, and I have this Moon Mars conjunction, so there's also like kind of Moon Mars Jupiter shit going on. But like my favorite Beatle is George Harrison, and he had Scorpio rising with Moon in the first, and I feel like it's
Ooh.
like so evident where he just like like they would be recording and he's just like sitting in the background, like kind of
Yeah.
not to say this is what Scorpio moons are like, but just kind of like wallowing a little bit. Like George, like Paul and John are like doing their thing, like writing music together, and he's like isolated, like has all these songs that he wants to play, and they like don't want to play his songs and shit. And
he had some of the best songs, you know what I mean? He had
my favorite.
Yeah.
And I think part of that might have been why spirituality became such an important thing for him. I think about myself with Moon in the first, especially in Sag, where it's just like what you see is what you get. Like I literally cannot mask my emotions. Like if I'm not happy, you're going to know. If I'm happy, you're going to. And I think it's a Mars in the first thing, but I will out myself as well as also a polyamorous person. And I was reminded of this podcast called Multi-Amory. They did this episode about
multi-amory.
The whole squad loves multi-amory.
The whole squad.
All my polyamorous homies love multi-amory. They did this episode about this concept called radar, which is basically like a business meeting for your relationship.
Stop it right now. Max and I are doing our quarterly radar this weekend.
Amazing. And part of that is like communication suggestions. So they have this thing called like the Triforce of communication. Aside, I kind of like really dislike all the polyamorous terms. Like, what the fuck is compersion? What are these terms we're coming out with? Anyway, the Triforce of communication, it's like when you're communicating something, expressing beforehand that you just want to be heard. I think it's these three things. You just want to be heard, you want to be offered suggestions, or you want like empathy. You want someone to be like emotionally reassuring. I might be wrong about the first one, but I think Mars in the first, and I've heard other Mars in the first people, I'm like, I very much relate to, I do not want you to offer me advice basically ever. Like if I want your advice, I will tell you. I often want to be heard, and I want to have you communicate with me when I share things with you in a way that feels emotionally reassuring, like Moon Mars conjunction. So it's just very interesting to hear like how the Moon Mars stuff can manifest in different ways, in terms of like how other people can like kind of receive you. Another thing that feels interesting too, in terms of like the Scorpio moon and like this idea of trudging, or this idea of like, oh, you're wallowing in your feelings too much, is like people I think have perceived me with Moon Mars in my first and Sag is like, ooh, you're really sensitive. And then like people will communicate with me in a certain way, and I'll be like, don't say that to me, or like don't communicate to me in that way. And people will be like, ooh, you're like touchy and sensitive. And it's like, no, I want to be received in a certain way. And it's just, it's interesting, these different kind of keywords that can come up with different moon placements in different locations.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would have never thought to call you sensitive. Like, I think that's funny, but maybe it's just because like we know each other in very different contexts, you know? But yeah, I know it's also... No, go ahead.
I probably would have called you sensitive. But that's maybe also because we know each other through ascendant assemblies, and those are intimate conversations, like writ large. Like we, as the Sag risings, we go into those and they're immediately there, basically. So
right.
The sect thing as a whole, because I was born right around sunset, and so it took some experimentation for me to even really decide if I was a day chart or a night chart, because both of my luminaries are really strong. Like my sun, being born right after sunset, my sun is practically on the descendant. You know, they're 2 degrees away from each other.
Wow.
And so being the most angular thing in my chart, that's what everyone sees. My middle name is Ray. People call me a ray of sunshine. Like that is what people know about me. Other people perceive me as solar. And I think I've actually said this to you, SP, and like some other friends. I've recently started saying it. I'm just a moon person trying to be the sun person that everyone knows that I am. Like just a moon person trying to be the sun. Because internally, like for me, I always felt like much more attached to the moon. Even though like I literally moved to Florida. I decided to move away from the town and like home that I've known because I desired to see the sun more. And so I've always been obsessed with sunrise and sunset. So I've always felt this imminent pull towards witnessing the sun rise and set every day, being close to a place where I can see the horizon very close. And even though I'm a rock climber and I love the mountains, I know that I could never live in a mountainous place because if it took that long, like the horizon is so high above essentially like where it would be at like actual land meeting, like the land has just so much more topography and all of those things, like the features give you less access to the sun in a roundabout way. But yet I am still very inherently lunar. And it took like experimenting with the lots and zodiacal releasing to see the ways that the lots switched based if I calculated, if I use like the day formula versus the night formula. Because my ascendant is 11, but my like very like early 11, but then my sun is 9 degrees, but like almost 10. It's like 9:52. And so it's like a degree and a half away, like just a few minutes. The sun, like it was still bright outside. And that's been like something that I really look at when I'm looking at charts, like my own and others, is like, what is the relationship to the sun and the moon, but light itself? Like how much light is there? And in my chart, like at the time that I was born, there was a lot of light. The sun had just set. But having the moon in the 12th, like the moon had just risen. The moon was nearing fullness. She was bright already. And then also Venus is really far away from my sun. Well, not really far, but she's in Gemini. She's like 15 degrees away from my sun. And so Venus was like approaching setting, but she was still very bright and had not yet hit the horizon. And so like benefic of sect, luminary of sect, both being like the only 2 things above the horizon. And then like the experiential understanding of the way that my lot of spirit and lot of fortune work in my life. It became very obvious that I was a night chart. Like there was no denying it. Although I am extraordinarily solar and others, especially others like the closest to me perceive that, you know, on the descendant in the 7th house, like whole sign 7th house, I guess quadrant 6th, but having that so seen doesn't change the fact that that's not like the way I perceive myself and the way that my experiences feel. And it really like spoke that like mirror place of the 7th, like that other, that like reflection, that looking upon, for me to really like finagle that and understand that. And then for me to feel less like internal shame about identifying with my moon so much. It was almost this thing of like, well, everybody else thinks I'm so solar and sees that, like, but why do they not see that about that? Why do they not think I'm lunar? Well, she's fallen in the 12th house. No fucking shit. They don't see it.
I think that's funny because I have a very similar like feeling in that because my chart ruler is my Libra sun. My chart ruler, I'm a Leo rising. My chart, you know, my L1 is a Libra sun. And I think for a long time, like, you know, I think for a long time it was very like people saw me as Libra. People see me as a Libra. If you look at me, you're like, oh yeah, that bitch like has Leo rising and like is a Libra sun. But I think with the moon and, you know, like with a Scorpio moon, we don't want to be perceived. So I think I get a lot of people saying like, you know, like I'm a very solar. It's also a struggle to show up as like a Libra sun because it's also, you know, like I'm ruled by 2 fallen luminaries. Like I have these 2 fallen luminaries, and it's like I struggle to be seen and struggle to be perceived in a way. You know, like I also say like a lot of my best kind of solar achievements are always with other people. And I think the thing with a Libra sun is like we're really terrible at like presenting ourselves and like having the light shine on us because we would rather have someone else like with us, or like we would rather shine the light on other people because that's how Libras, you know, like a Venus ruled sun would perceive that. But it's funny because I'm starting to learn what it is to like, instead of fully putting the spotlight on other people, like sharing the spotlight. I can also be seen and be perceived. And my moon being so close to, you know, my sun, it's like I'm right at the stage where it's like a new moon going into like the next phase. So it's like it's interesting to have that moon in my fourth too, and being that like, especially being in that like firm mycelial root network underworld, kind of like these deep ancestral roots of like, they are both, it's like I want to be perceived but with other people, right? But it's also like I need the time for myself to feel at home. I need to be rooted in my home. I need to be rooted, you know, like my home is my favorite fucking place. Like I mean, like SP and I also know each other, like have known each other more because you live in New York. And like you've stayed at my home, you've met my dogs, like you like that's my family, you know. Right. Also having that Mars ruling the fourth is the 12th house. Mars ruling the fourth is also like, there are these like very deep connections with me with like I said, like the dogs are going to be a very important part of life. But it is interesting to have that sect of like where I didn't feel very lunar, and it also because like I just wasn't in touch with my emotions and wasn't accessing it. And it's funny too when we think of remediation and like ways to mitigate the fallen placements in our chart. And part of it for me is just like embracing that, like, yeah, the way that I access my emotions is not the same as other people's. And like thinking myself as a lunar I think of myself as a lunar individual, but most of it is also inherently with that night sect, is like, I know I'm a night sect person. Like the ultimate dispositors in my chart are eventually that mutual reception Mars and Moon. So it's like, even though I appear as this, I don't even think I appear that much as a solar person. I fucking love being at home. I love being at home. I love staying. Like, I love being in my comfy, cozy hiding space. You know, like my little hidey hole with my dogs.
I also love it. I just don't spend much time here. And that's probably why people perceive me as such. And that's also like the Gemini in me, which is I'm constantly moving here to here. Like the pollinator bee analogy is so real for me, because like I'm always doing something. I'm always going to somewhere. I'm always in a different place. I'm constantly between all these different things. And I think it's interesting, Christa, that we both have that similar thing going on in our chart, where we have like a fire rising and an air sun that are like essentially protecting our little fallen moon. Is that we have this like big personality and like big like energy, and yet like hiding and protecting this like sweet inner soft vulnerable part of ourselves.
People think I'm an extrovert. I'm like, I could not be further from that. And it's just like, it's the charisma and it's the charm and like having a Venusian sun, you know, like I think I'm very I joke with my dad once said that like I got his best qualities, so like his charisma and stuff, and I got my mother's worst qualities, which is like not nice to say about your spouse, but like I get it. It's like my mom is also very secretive. She's a Scorpio sun, so it's like very interesting to like see how like she does not let people get access to her, you know, like it's there's like not even a mask, but it's just like who she is. And it's interesting to have that, like, and her Libra moon is very much like, I like pleasant things, like I go shopping to like my emotions. But it's just so interesting to have people reflect to me and be like, you have such a big, like, you're so charming, like how are you an introvert? And I'm like, I cannot recharge with a bunch of people, you know, like that, like
that part.
Yeah. And they're like, well, you're like both. And I'm like, yeah, there's two dimensions of like introversion, extroversion. It's like, are you outgoing or shy? And introvert versus extrovert is more like, do you gain energy from being with people, or does it drain you? And I'm like, it drains the frick out of me. So
yeah, like you can be an outgoing introvert.
Totally.
That is a thing that you're capable of doing. And maybe that is a fallen moon experience, because inherently you have to have bodily time to settle and rest without any filters, without any external factors affecting you. Maybe that is a thing that like you're only really able to feel those depths without anyone else around.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so there is like for both of you, even though you have different sun sign placements, there is like a kind of hiding in plain sight element.
Oh, for sure. 1,000,000% hiding in plain sight. And I mean, anyone who listens to this pod, like I really don't care because like I'm not ashamed of it and we know that. But funny enough, like it's not super like well known that I'm poly, partially because my partner and I both like coach and teach kids, and so we don't like flaunt it by any means. Like it's not a conflict of interest, but we just don't talk about it because there's no like real need to make it public.
Yeah, why?
Right.
It's also like a Scorpio moon thing of like,
period.
Why do you need to know my fucking business if it doesn't have anything to do with you? You know?
As a Capricorn sun, I feel like that makes sense too. It's just like shits need to know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Shits need to know. But yeah, like that very like hiding in plain sight thing of like being able to be around a lot of different types of people, being able to think of things to talk about with a lot of different people about a lot of different subjects that also then can, you know, preserve the little topics that you don't want to touch.
Yeah.
There's so, like when there's so many other things to choose from, why would you need to go there? And then I guess for me, like the opposite side of the spectrum is like, why not go there if it's there? But
why not go there? It's more of like, for me, it's I could go there if I want to, but have you earned it? Have you earned that? And this is also just like a Saturn lesson for me because Saturn is on my descendant, and after my Saturn return, it was very much like, oh, I do not have to cut people off and use my Mars. I can, my Saturn is the only thing that's dignified in my chart.
Oof.
Everything else is debilitated in some way.
I mean, if it's gonna be something, your Maleficatus sect is a good one though. Shit.
Yeah, I know, right?
What I would give.
So it's like it's like I need to set the boundaries. I'm like, do you have access to this part of myself, of this like deep inner recesses of things? And you know, also with that Scorpio Venus being co-president with a moon, it's very much like, yeah, you got to earn that. You have to earn that deep, like you have to earn the depth.
Yes.
Astrologer once told me that like my chart is basically like you're a pillow princess in the streets and a like goth chick in the sheets. And I'm like, well, that makes sense. That I get it. It is what it is. And so I think that like is very much indicative of like, yes, I contain multitudes. I'm a multidimensional person, you know, like I can fuck around and find out, but also like I think maybe you also feel this too, McKenzie, is like I feel like people kind of put this image onto us and project it, right? Which is the rising, whatever. They project this idea of us onto ourselves, and it's like, well, no, you just haven't been able to get to that place with me. Like I haven't seen you earn it. Where it's like,
yeah, like people making quick like judgments and assessments about you just because they haven't gotten to know all of you yet, and especially like the layers of it, like with how deep it runs with like the moon in Scorpio. There's so many different things. It's like you could probably think that you know everything when you've only scratched the surface, but but there's not as many layers to you, so you think that in that way there must not be as many layers to me, and so you've gotten to know 3 of them and you think that's all of them.
And it's like, no, and also I'm not gonna let you know how many layers I have. Yeah, I'm not telling you how deep this onion goes.
Period.
To use Shrek as my brand. We love
you
Shrek.
know, funny enough,
is your brand.
It is your brand. Shrek is your brand. Funny enough, when I was a kid, I used to be able to bite into a raw red onion like an apple.
Damn.
Why?
I thought that shit was tasty.
That's like some
I have always loved
fortitude right there.
I've always loved onions, like the sharp, like pungent flavor of like onions. I don't love like super spicy stuff because I don't like spicy just for heat, but I love like the flavors of different spices and stuff. I also like drink a ton of kombucha, so I have like all of that like gnarly intestinal goodness going down. Yeah, so I'll plug. I don't give a fuck. My favorite kombucha is the one that is brewed locally. I live in St. Petersburg, Florida, for anyone who doesn't know. I think I forgot to mention that at the top, but I do my local astrology meetups every month at a kombucha brewery. So it's the city's first like walk up kombucha brewery where you can get all of their brews on tap. You can get flights of them. They do slushies, like all types of goodness. But all of it is like real good, like local fresh ingredients. And so they have a lot of kombuchas that are seasonal. Like they don't have the same kombuchas all year, which for me as a super mutable person, I am highly attracted to that. I'm like, cause they have a couple flavors that are like foundations. But the one that I'm actually drinking right now, funny enough, for this podcast is called Ocean Potion.
Amazing.
And so like it's so good. And like the owners absolutely amazing, like really good people. I've been doing my meetups there for months, and like absolutely, whether people come just for the meetups or they're there and they like pop into it, just like the most amazing community. And so I like to plug them, even though you can't buy them anywhere, because that's one of my favorite things about them is that they're local. Like they don't bottle and sell. You have to go there, drink it, get your growler refill there, or go to one of the places in the city that has them on tap. But yeah, big love for Beach Kombucha in my heart, because they've been facilitating my meetups there, and that's where I've been getting my kombucha, and that I've basically gotten a ton of my friends to start going there. Because maybe it's not as well known, but the St. Petersburg, Tampa Bay area actually has like a pretty massive kombucha community. There are multiple companies here that make kombucha, like one of
Scobies. I'm sorry.
No, literally, it's fucking real. Like
Scobies, like different cultures.
It's real. Like there's a company here called Mother Kombucha, and they really like revolutionized it, and they're now available in stores like all over the country, but they really revolutionized the industry. And since then, like so many different places have been popping up that make it, like Beach, and like obviously places that are now like taking that model and like inspiring it, changing it, making it their own. And so my gut health has never been better.
Amazing.
And I think maybe that's like, and we kind of talked about like mortality and stuff like that. And I very much have that feeling all the time. Like, what can I do to optimize my vessel so that it stays alive longer? Like, how can I like put as much goodness in myself as I can so that I essentially prevent myself from rotting from the inside? Because as morbid as it is, like as soon as we're born, we start dying. Like, we literally are constantly decaying in some way, shape, or form, whether it's like our skin flaking off, like cutting our hair, if we break a bone or a surgery or something like that, like we're always decaying. And so it's like, what can I do to prevent this imminent, inevitable decay? And how can I make myself feel as good for as long as possible? That's really like the fixedness of the fallen moon is like, if it's gonna feel shitty, let's make it as least miserable as possible. Let's reduce the suffering as much as we can so that I can still do this thing for as long as possible.
Well, one of the things that I think I don't like, we've talked about, I don't love using modern rulership. I do think in this case, part of like Pluto being like a modern ruler of Scorpio is like this idea of like, and I think it's funny because we think of transformation in this like change and shift from like, you know, like for me, especially as a Scorpio moon who has it in the 4th house, of this like descending down into the depths of the underworld, which is like where things ferment, they rot, they transform, like also like the kombucha thing. So I'm like, yeah, the gut health is very important, you know, like those things are so I think there's this whole thing of like, I cannot separate the moon from the body and like the mind body health component of it, because it is so intrinsically like linked. And like one of the things too is like when we think of transformation as like, you know, you think that's a very mutable thing, but it's like the only constant in life is change and taxes, but like change, you know, death and taxes,
death eventually.
And, yeah. So it's like that to me is like a fixed thing. It's a fixed fact. Like we have the knowledge that like change is inevitable. Transformation is constantly happening. If you're like a Buddhist, like, you know that like you're literally as a person constantly changing. And that's I know that like sounds like an oxymoron, but like that's one of the things of like having this fixed moon is the understanding that like things change, things die, things like it's all part of this cycle. It's all part of a cycle of regrowth and like rebirth and like that you are I'm constantly mourning versions of myself that like that have existed, but also, you know, like I said this and I wanted to write something with it eventually where it's like I've also grieved futures that haven't happened yet for me. You know?
Youch. Yep.
Yeah.
I have grieved versions of myself that I chose to not let exist because I pursued a different path.
Yeah.
And I think, Chris, is something you said earlier is really potent, and I'm going to like link it back, is what you said about like holding grudges. And it's not just like holding the grudge, it's that your body remembers. And like the connotation of like the moon with memory, and how people that like maybe hear that in a modern perspective think of like, oh, memory, but they don't think like memory, like a felt sense in your body. They're thinking of it as a mental faculty of like, oh, I'm remembering these facts and figures and data, whereas just thinking of like the feelings in your body that you remember. And I'm reminded of the book, The Body Keeps the Score.
The body truly does keep the score.
It truly does keep the score. And one of my favorite things in it is like the chapter on like healing from trauma. And it talks about the fact that one of the natural ways that you like heal, that you calm yourself down, is by physical touch. And like the actual sensation of like someone hugging you, someone touching you. But then like the dual sword of that is like, if you've never been comfortable with that, if you have no way of interacting with physical touch in that way, how is it supposed to be something that calms you down? Like if you're not familiar with it, and how that sense of then like building that familiarity, building that like ways of handling feelings and ways of containing yourself and being able to be in connection with others, like actually physically, then affects how you heal. And then like how that affects all of the ways that your body remembers sensation, and how it links what you're feeling with what you're sensing, and how that reflects in that healing touch with people.
Again, there's this like, I think, tension with the moon and fall of like potentially being in this place of isolation, being in the cocoon. And what does it mean when touch is dangerous, or touch feels triggering? How do you move out of a place of isolation that can be safe and comfortable to move into touch being something that also is safe and comfortable? Because as mammals, we're kind of wired to
hardwired for
touch one another. And if you look at like puppies, they're all sleeping together, you know, or like, you know,
psychology, like the monkey experiment, where it was like,
Yep.
you know, like they go to their wire monkey for all of the nutritional value and like guess all these needs, but they all end up going to like the monkey that's made out of like cloths and blankets, because that's comfort. You know, and I think it's hard too, and I don't know if you have this experience, McKenzie, with a Scorpio moon, like, yes, the body and the mind are entangled and stuff, and it's also like because we don't learn ways of accessing, I don't know, it's one of those things where it's like, if you don't have the help that you need, external help that you need, or seeking it, or like going through ways of like, trauma cannot be healed by like yourself alone, really. It's like, it does take, there's a book, What My Bones Know, by Stephanie-Foo, and then from that there was a book by, I want to say it's like Walking Through Trauma or something, I gotta look this up. Gretchen Schmelzer has a book called Journey Through Trauma, which I think is like a really good book for people who like don't have the access to, you know, therapy or any of that, because I acknowledge like it's not accessible to everyone. But
Absolutely.
like the thing with like that I think is hard for Scorpio moons is that like when we feel things, when we finally have access to our feelings, we do have that like wallowing period where we're just like sitting, and like it's kind of an extreme, right? It's like I either don't, especially for someone who hasn't learned how to deal with the Scorpio moon, it's either I don't feel shit at all because I'm avoiding it, or I feel everything and it's very intense. And I think one of the things about trauma and like dealing with like the body keeping the score is like, the only way to really heal through this is to practice, right? Practice healthy relations, with yourself, whatever. also like it's baby steps, right? We think of like 90 days to like, is it 90 days of like doing everything, something like small habit changes, like it takes 90 days.
A lifestyle change, yeah.
Yeah, lifestyle change. So it's like, in order to heal trauma, right? Like you have to start incorporating small, doable, like, you know, for ADHD, we call it like chunking. To finish a project, you're going to chunk everything. But it's like to have a small, or like to have a lifestyle change, you're going to have to make small moves every day to like incorporate that and learn from it and like make sure that it's eventually hardwired. And like I think that's a very fixed thing. It's a very like learning that like it doesn't have to be one extreme or the other, which is like I think the like people who haven't really explored their Scorpio moon do that. And realizing that like, oh, if I like let little things in every day and like take steps to feel these little things and like be able to like soothing self-touch for myself, like whenever I'm upset, checking with my body. Like my new therapist is like a trauma therapist too, so she's taught me a lot of this stuff of like, you know, it's helpful to have someone to help to be like, oh, okay, you're talking about this thing, you're venting, and like you can hear your voice and like your tone and your like body getting like more ramped up. And then it's like having someone reflect that back to you and be like, all right, let's like slow down, let's slow down this process. Like if it helps you, like put a hand on your chest and like rub it for like soft self-soothing. Those are like small things, you know, like I think there's also like with panic attacks, there's like the viewing 5 that works, you know, like 5 things you can see in the room kind of thing. It's like learning all of these small like coping skills will eventually, like if you do these habits, everyday lifestyle change, it eventually, that is a fixed thing. It eventually will like lead to you learning all these coping skills so that when you know, like we don't exist in isolation and like there will be things that trigger us, right? But it's like because I've done all these things for a long time, like and in small increments, so that I've made it more manageable for me. But these like manageable life skills of like having this like we need to I think a lot of it is like reframing, right? Of like being like, oh, this could be mutable, but it's not mutable. It is all about like sustaining things and like being kind of finding sustainable coping mechanisms. And that is I feel like that is a very Scorpio moon thing. But I also think a lot of Scorpio moons, at least the ones that I've in my experience and also in like talking to clients who have it, is like they have not necessarily learned how to like access that. And I think like because a lot of us, or like sometimes we avoid things, or it can go like facilitate from extreme to extreme. It's like, okay, we gotta like meet in the middle and like, where's your body at right now? You know, where's your body at? Because that's where your emotions are sitting. And yeah, like I think like that's the relationship to the moon that I have, is like it is really in the body. It's in the body. It's literally the moon is. So it's like it's really in the body, but you have to give people like the tools and access for learning how to like cope with it, right? Which is like what we do as astrologers, but also therapists do in like their work with trauma or like whatever you need to deal with. It's a fixed, manageable habit.
It is, and it's something that comes up. I feel like people would expect it, but sometimes they don't. Like when I even have like just dance clients, like sometimes adults, but even sometimes kids too, like when I'm teaching them in class, like the process of moving your body will move your emotions and it will get things flowing, whether you are prepared for it or equipped to talk about it or handle it or not. It will happen when you incite movement, when you allow yourself to be vulnerable in your body, that other things will start flowing and coming. A couple things that you said, Christa, that I like really wanted to touch on was how you were talking about those, essentially those like small steps that you can take to handle things, and how that contrasts with how like that massive floodgate feeling of like, okay, here's all of my feelings, all of them happening all at once, versus the like almost numb feeling that you can get when you're not allowing things to come in and everything is just isolated, everything's pushed out. and you're not allowing yourself to feel anything, which then has that like opening of the floodgate feeling when you're actually able to feel everything, and how those small steps can then help like prevent the overwhelm of getting there, like that emotional overwhelm state that you reach when it's not just one feeling, it's all of the feelings, and you're trying to feel all of them and process all of them at once, and then how much it can undertake you, and you can really get like swept under the current in a way. I almost think of like the visual. I know ocean is usually like a Pisces kind of phrase, but I think of like the aggressiveness of the ocean sometimes, and like the way that waves can like batter a coastline and like erode it. And then how that erosion often lends to like finding fossils or finding things like little jewels or something, and how the process of like that aggressively taking away then reveals something else underneath. And what you said, SP, about like how to like approaching touch when it's not safe, is something that I deal with a lot, because a lot of my clients, like I teach adults dance that are both like trained professionals and that are like complete new beginners. And so having like the different interactions with that, like every person has a different relationship with their body, but if you're a complete beginner and you've never really had much of a movement practice, just starting to dance is not just starting to dance. You're starting to work through stuff. Like that's you saying, I'm ready to feel things. I'm ready to work through things. And the level of intensity that can happen in those sessions, literally just from things like giving yourself a hug, like stopping and taking a moment to like run your fingers over your body, you know, like in the way that you would want someone else to, but having that moment of understanding that for yourself first, and finding that security and that safety within yourself before expecting to be okay with it with someone else. I feel that often, maybe because of the society we live in, because like sex sells, we all know it, there's almost this perception that we should all already be okay with people touching us, and that we should be used to people, you know, touching each other and perceiving your body and all of these things, when no one is entitled to that. And no one has just that permission inherently. And the last thing that I wanted to bring up was how you mentioned that like those like tools and resources, specifically like the one about senses, especially in like moments of like panic, anxiety, like attacks like that. I love that one so specifically, like the 5 senses and like picking out the things, because it's such a fast way to ground yourself, to be like, you know what, I'm still a human. I'm still here. I'm still alive. What can I hold on to in this moment that can remind me that I'm alive, that I actually do have something to connect to? Because especially in those moments, I feel like a lot of those moments come from and are stemmed from like that lack of control, that lack of connection, being like almost out of your body in a sense. Like you're so up in another place, you're not feeling things, you're not essentially like awake or aware to what's happening and what's going on inside, that you then start running on autopilot. And then tapping back in slowly to finding those ways to connect you is actually like enlivening to all of the senses so deeply.
And I think as someone with like chronic illness, I think like learning to be in your body is a like both difficult, like it's both challenging, but also like really useful skill, because it's like, oh, my body does not feel right in this moment. Number one, why? Like, what is the trigger of me not feeling? Like, is it something that is affecting me emotionally? Is it that like I feel a weird pain in my back? It is really like, I mean, I think everything's like so interconnected, right? Like this is just
Absolutely.
but it's also just like, oh, like I also don't think, and I want to just, I feel like we don't talk about like meditation enough as like a spiritual practice, and like how a lot of that is really helpful to like engage in relationships with the planet, especially the moon, because the moon is your body, like and I like bodily figure and like flesh vessel, and the things that affect it. And I think like meditation has been really helpful for me in like engaging in those relationships with, you know, with planets as a relational, you know, astrologer, and just in general, being in touch with your body. And in that process, you do engage with the moon, right? And as a Martian moon, like a lot of that is movement. A lot of that is movement for me. And like, I hate moving. I hate it. hate moving my body. This is very fixed, right? It's like I love staying in the same fucking place. I love not change. But as we have talked about earlier, that like change is a constant. I have to enjoy change. I don't have to enjoy change, but I have to accept it, and I have to be comfortable with that. And part of that is learning how to meditate so that I can like be in touch with my body. And like, you know, this is kind of an aside too, of like, as someone who has like a constantly changing body because of like my medications and all that stuff, like and like talking about like weight and like practices here, like I don't like to weigh myself, but I have diabetes and like all these other metabolic issues. So I'm on a ton of medication that, like, not a ton, but I'm on medication to help me manage that. And it's really weird to like be on a medication. Like, I don't mind talking about it because it's like, you've heard of Ozempic and Wegovy. Wegovy is just like a double dose of Ozempic that's meant to help people not eat as much and like to lose weight. But I'm on Ozempic, which is helping for like my diabetic medication, and it's really helped. But it's part of it is because like I've dropped so much of my weight in like a number of years. Like in the last 3 years, I've lost like 40 to 50 pounds. And it is weird to like mourn that change in my body of like, yes, like people couldn't think of me and look at me and be like, you're obese or like fat. And it's like, okay, I don't care. Like I'm at the like quote unquote healthiest point in my body, but I also like feel like shit a lot of the time. And like, it's weird to mourn my body and also see physical changes of that. Like I had to do a closet clean out recently. I didn't have to, but I did a closet clean out recently. And it was so weird being like, oh, I have to let go of all these clothes that like, especially as someone who is a Libra with a Leo rising, like I love fashion and aesthetic. Like that is a way I relate to myself. And so getting rid of like all these clothes that like, wow, this made me. And this was like the way I was seen and validated as like a fat, marginalized person is through my sense of style and aesthetic. It was very much like, oh, I have to come to terms with like my body is changing in a way that like is maybe healthier, quote unquote, on paper, but it's also weird and I'm mourning it. So even though I'm healthier, I'm still in the process of mourning what, it's like, I really like, I thank my body for like giving me that cushiony fat because it made me softer and it made my like literal flesh vessel softer and like gave me like this cushioning. And now I don't have that. And so it's like so strange to me to like be in this process of constantly mourning my body, but also thanking it for like providing for me. And I think meditation is very helpful with that in like, you will learn what the changes are and like whether or not they're productive. And also like in that aspect of like, I see the moon, like the moon, my biggest moon practice. And I know like we've talked about magic and materia and stuff. I don't know if you all have used moon materia on yourselves. Like
that's a funny joke.
Yeah, I know. So I've used
that's
moon
a
materia on myself.
Funny joke.
It is so difficult. It's
bad.
Probably it's
some
potent. It's some of the most like harsh.
It's bad.
It's the harshest material I've worked on myself, and it's so funny because like I love my relationship with the moon.
So funny because I loved using moon materia.
Must be nice to have Jupiter in Cancer, huh?
Yeah, might be nice. Must be nice.
Must be fucking nice.
Yeah.
I can't do it. Like
I can't.
I
can't do it.
Did you get the sphere and sundry materia for the moon? I did.
Mm-hmm.
I did.
Moon in Cancer?
I could not use it.
Moon in Cancer, I would never spend money on that. Personally, it would go to waste. I've tried to experiment with Moon in Cancer shit on my own, and I cannot even fucking touch it. No. I've had some success with Exalted Moon, but usually not when it's like just Moon. Like it has to be like Moon Venus, especially because it's like Moon in Taurus anyway. So it can't be like just a moon working. It has to have like other stuff. But that's kind of how I am with materia as a whole anyway. I don't do super well with like especially like elections that highlight one specific thing, unless it's like
a fixed
maybe
star.
Jupiter.
A fixed star?
Yeah, unless it's maybe Jupiter, or a fixed star. But like I generally work better with like those kind of like more multi-purpose elections in materia. But I can't touch Moon in Cancer with a 10-foot pole. Like it's my 8th house. That's where my lot of fortune is. It's a painful place.
I'm
it's
so
bad.
glad to hear that because I'm like, I thought it would be such a good way for me to remediate this moon.
LOL.
And oh my God, my big like moon practice and like big moon thing is like I do baths. I'm a bath witch. Like so I bought the bath salts. I had the colonia. I can only use the colonia. The bath salts made me, and this is what like Amaya was telling me, because she's such a lunar she's been on the podcast. Yeah, she is such a lunar like person. She's my lunar mommy, as I like to call her. She was like, oh, how did that work for you? And I'm like, it highlighted like every single time I would take a bath with those bath salts, it would highlight like, oh, I have like period cramps, or I have like really bad pain in my lower back, and it's like it's highlighting, it's working the way it's intended to for me, of like,
and it don't feel good.
It doesn't feel good. It's not always supposed to feel good, especially with Scorpio moon, right? Like it's really highlighting and giving and bringing attention to the parts of my body that I haven't been tending to. And that's how the materia works for me. And anything lunar in that place, like it's really hard for me to engage with lunar materia. I just can't do it. I
can't do it because for me it kind of feels like doing moon healing on the moon's terms as opposed to doing moon healing on my terms. And like the agency almost feels like it's taken away from me in a way when I try to engage with like a moon and domicile materia. Funny enough, like magically, like the moon was the first planet that I ever worked with. I used to make like full moon, new moon, like I guess technically now like I would call it materia, but I was such a baby mage at the time. I didn't really like conceptualize it as materia, but I was making like waters and oils and stuff on like full moons and new moons that weren't necessarily elections, but I was like putting them out for multiple evenings under the moon and stuff like that. So I guess like a more what we would call like casual materia per se. And so like engaging with the moon was like where I started with any planet at all. And it took a really long time for me to feel like confident in it. Like I was doing it for months, literal years before I was like, oh, wait, this is a magical practice, because it took me like doing it long enough, like actually doing the practice for my brain to be like, did you know that this is a relationship with the moon? Did you understand that going out every night, no matter the phase, like talking with her, do you understand that that's a magical practice? And it took a long time for the actual like thought to wrap around it, to understand that that was like the most intimate planetary relationship that I had up until that point. So
yeah, it's interesting to like, I feel like a lot of I think one of the easiest ways to engage with a planet is the moon. Like it's one of the easier planets to engage with. Because she's right there. You can see her, you can track her cycles, like, and I think it's funny because I just like there are so many other people, and maybe it's just because I have a fallen moon or whatever, but it's like I do engage with her, but it's on my terms, right? It's like on my terms. I should be better at being an astrologer who like works with the moon, but it's like it's so funny because it's just like it's there. She's there. Like she will, like she moves and she changes her cycles every month. So I'm like, it really has helped me with like, as someone with PCOS and like someone who reproductive stuff, like it really has helped understand my cycle a little bit more. And that's why you have all these like woo feminine energy, high feminine like stuff. I'm sorry, I'm non-binary, so I fucking hate when people are like the divine masculine and feminine.
I also hate it. And like I also hate that, especially as someone with a dance background who for those who don't know, my specialty is adult heels. I've been doing heels for almost 10 years before heels had even really taken the industry by storm the way that it has. And I've like watched the style change so much, and I see that being the rhetoric that teachers talk about when they talk about heels. They're like, the divine feminine sensuality when you put on heels. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I know gay men who do heels. Like, and yeah, like you can say femininity, but that doesn't mean that there's not masculine energy in it. And funny enough, something that a couple of my students have complimented me on is that a lot of my choreography is very hard hitting and precise at times. Like I can flow very much between like that softness and then like the hard hitting in it. Yeah, literally.
Yes, Stinger.
And so it's so frustrating to see that. And like the moon, I often refer to her as she because she has told me to, you know, that's not me like feminizing her. That's literally just through my relationship with her. She's like, yeah, you can call me that. And so that's something that I always like would definitely encourage people to explore, like with their relationship to gender as a whole before trying to gender a planet. And trying to say that a planet has I would say like purview over one gender's things, you know, like you can't look at the moon and say she only deals with feminine things because that's reductive.
Yeah, I mean, I have the moon in my first. I don't identify, I mean, gender is weird, and I don't necessarily identify like within the binary necessarily, but I don't identify as feminine at all. So, but I consider myself like a very lunar person.
Yes.
And it's interesting just thinking about lunar materia because like I had a very positive experience, very transformative experience working with Spirit Sundry's moon and Cancer oil. And, you know, it just speaks to differences of like McKenzie, we're both Sagittarius rising. So the moon rules both of our eighth houses, but I have Jupiter in the eighth house and I have the moon in the first house. And so there's this kind of like mutual exchange between these two planets. And there's like a different relationship that I have with the eighth house than perhaps you do. You know, maybe you have this different relationship with the 12th house and the second house that I don't necessarily have with the 12th house. And so just goes to show how like complex and contextual astrology is, even within charts that to an outside observer might look very similar.
Yeah, definitely. Like to an outside observer could potentially look, yeah, very similar. Even though we don't have like a ton of overlap, you know, like we have that Jupiter opposition, something that I guess I haven't mentioned up until now, which is that my Jupiter's in Capricorn. And so the next applying aspect from my moon is a sextile to Jupiter in Capricorn. And so like that very like intense relationship, like through like not just dark houses, but also like reflecting back on the eighth house and how that's like, that's not a vibe spot. It is so, it's so not fun to go there. Like, and it's crazy to even, not a vibe. And it's crazy to talk to astrologers and like, even just like talking about all of our different experiential, like circumstances within our charts and hearing people talk, like people that maybe like have eighth house placements that they're more comfortable with. And they're like, oh, I don't have anything in the 12th though. Like, I don't go there. I avoid that. And how for someone like me, who's like very comfortable in my 12th house, it's like, eighth house, I'll just not go there. Yeah. Even though I end up there a lot of the times, like through my lot of fortune being there and being ruled by my fallen moon, it kind of ends up that like I find myself in the eighth house and then from there I choose to go to the 12th.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the reverse for me because I have my ascendant ruler in my eighth and I have my lot of spirit in my 12th. So I like find the 12th house as like a foreign place, no pun intended, because it's like associated with foreign lands or what have you. But it's like something I really need to choose. So yeah, it's very interesting. All right, y'all, I actually have to go, so we're gonna have to wrap this conversation.
I love this for us. We're vibing. All right.
Yeah. This has been an amazing conversation though. Thank you so much for generously sharing your knowledge and experience and your time. Do you have any imparting thoughts before we go?
I was like, I got a little plug to just one of our people in our community. I like, my books are closed, so I'm like, if you want to eventually book with me, great. I have a bunch of stuff coming out. I have a newsletter, thisiswhatyouwant.org, and also you can view my social media, Sup Christa. I'm not on Twitter anymore because it doesn't exist. But one of our like really good colleagues and friends of mine, Alyssa Sorio, is at Alyssa of Cups, has for the past year been dealing with a lot of things. And so like my big thing is like, you know, mutual aid in the spirit of the moon, and like with my Venus as well, of just like she needs a couple hundred more, I think, but she has a GoFundMe. Please book her. Like her books are open too. She's been such a wonderful like community builder in the astrology community, is a, you know, activist and organizer, and has fallen on hard times. So I just like would love for y'all to like go view her page, go view her thing, go view her like offering. She is offering her books too. Like I'm not open, so like go spread the wealth. Cool. And also just her GoFundMe, because you know it's time that we help people who are, you know, she does drunk astrology, and like I've I've done a bunch of like weird unhinged presentations on like Shrek and 90 Day Fiance on that. And I think like as someone who, I would do this for anyone in our community, but like as someone who has really like put in a lot of work to like building these like fun spaces and not just academic shit, like we should all support Alyssa. But also, I love y'all and thank you for having me on here.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll be sure to put Alyssa's, all of her links and stuff in the show notes, and people, definitely please support her if you're able. How about you, McKenzie? Is there anything that you're working on?
Sure. I'll plug some stuff. I want to start by plugging actually, Shahir, because Shahir is like the third leg of our like Night Sect trilogy of our like Bermuda Triangle vibes. And so like SP and I met through Ascendant Assemblies, and Shahir, like Super Sensory Shahir, they are also a Sag Rising. We connected through Ascendant Assemblies. While SP's been doing like the Moon series, and on my podcast, Funk with Fate, we've been doing the Mars series. Shahir has done a Venus series, and so all three of us Sag Rising Night Sect babies have done this like exploration of information into the night chart, the Night Sect planets, Mars, Venus, and the Moon, and like talking with astrologers. And so along with like both of ours on like Mars and the Moon, definitely go check out Shahir's as well, because I think it very much describes us all as people. The fact that you're doing the Moon one, the fact that Shahir's doing the Venus one, and the fact that I'm doing the Mars one really encapsulates a lot of like beauty within our chart dynamics. So want to plug Shahir as like the third of us. But then, like go check out my podcast. It's available on all of the places. Chris has been on it. SP's going to be on it. Like y'all are
breaking news. I didn't even know this.
Breaking news, getting invited, reciprocal pods.
You have to, everybody has to go pod for pod in the community. There's so many good podcasts that we have in the community, besides like the obvious Chris Brennan, who has raised us all. You know, we've all like, so many of us have reached out, father, truly, have reached out and like done our own work in it. My books are sort of open right now. I think I have like maybe 1 or 2 more spots in like October available, but they're not going to be open during November, because every November I take like 2 weeks off and go rock climbing in the mountains. It's part of my Scorpio Sag life where I'm like, I wish to not be perceived. I'm going to run away. And it's beautiful and I love it, but they'll be open again in December. But I do like natal, timing, synastry compatibility. I really love doing rectification and like the astro dance integration work. Those are some of my like favorite things that I do. And I feel like probably anybody listening is probably going to work with me virtually, but I do a lot of in person. Like I have local meetups every month at the kombucha spot. And then I just started doing in-person readings at a metaphysical shop called Charmique Treasures. The owners are amazing. And so I do a lot more, I feel like, in person than I do virtually right now, which isn't
house.
I'm having, I just finished, I guess the real answer is that I'm in my 4th house year, but my perfection from Sect Light, since I'm like have a 12th house moon, is 1 year after. So I'm technically perfected in like 3rd house year from Sect Light. And although I'm in my 4th house year, like perfection from the ascendant. And so definitely my perfection years have that like kind of like echoing effect where they kind of like things kind of come and wrap back up the next year. And so the 2 houses will be like intertwined with each other, especially because for me, like my 2nd and 3rd house are both ruled by Saturn, but being in my 4th house year, Saturn is in my 4th house right now. So it's like cycles are cycling. Cycles are cycling big time. But that's like all of the things. Like you can find me on the socials and stuff, like subscribe to my newsletter. I don't really do them that often. I'm trying to get better about sending newsletters. I use Instagram when I'm
to write.
I love writing them. It's actually just getting the time. For me, it's literally the time. As I probably mentioned, as probably mentioned, I have like 4 jobs. So like I do 1,000,001 things. And so I'm constantly working. And so it's really just for me finding the time. But I'm on the internet and on socials when I'm in the mood to be, when I'm not cocooning. I haven't used like Twitter or Threads or any of those in like forever, because I just have no entrance for the social medias. I'm like, you can text me or call me or email me or see me in person, or I'll send you a selfie or something. But like that's where I'm at with people. But I do love the gram for like the visual aspect of it. But that's really it for me. I'm not really working on anything major. I'm working on something that I'm writing right now that I don't know when I'm going to be done with it. There's a couple different
collab. Yeah, I have some fun collabs coming out too. We
Yeah.
can talk about that later, but
honestly, yeah.
But yeah, look out for something fun coming out next year from me and a collaborator. It will be a hard copy thing, so it's a deliverable.
Very excited.
I'm very excited. We've been trying to work on this for like 2 years. Has to do with pets as well. Maybe that's a hint.
Nice.
But yeah, that's coming out next year. And then yeah, my books are closed, so just visit us on social media and then go check out. I'm very happy that I was here. Thank you so much and having me in this vibes talk vibey.
Yeah, it's an honor to talk about the moon. Truly, she's the one, so it's an honor to talk about her and let us expose ourselves.
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been an honor talking with you both, and yeah, hope to talk to you again soon.
Yeah, bye.
Love y'all.
To support the show by donating or becoming a member, please visit my website, which is linked in the show notes. And please subscribe to the show wherever you listen. You can also find me on Instagram and Twitter. See those links in the show notes as well. If you have any questions or feedback on the show, please feel free to contact me via my website or email me at sphallhorary@gmail.com. In the show notes, you can also find links to astrologers and resources that we touched on in this episode. Thanks. See you next time.